Chapter 1334. The elder was a little angry at Chu Fengmian's attitude, but he maintained a smile on his face. Sir, did you just buy a purple meridian? I am an elder of the Eclipse Hall in the Avalon of 5 Elements. This purple meridian originally belonged to our Eclipse Hall, but it was stolen by a thief. If you can return this purple meridian to our Eclipse Hall, we will definitely reward you handsomely. The elder took a step forward and spoke to Chu Fengmian. Not interested. Chu Fengmian didn't care about the Avalon of 5 Elements or Eclipse Hall. As for the elder's words, they were laughable in Chu Fengmian's eyes. Chu Fengmian could tell that the elder wanted to buy the purple meridian from Chu Fengmian. Not only did he want to buy it, he didn't even intend to pay the price. Let's go. Chu Fengmian glanced at the elder and spoke to Luo Kong, who was beside him, as he prepared to leave. However, the elder took a step forward and blocked Chu Fengmian's path. Sir, this old man is kindly discussing this with you. You don't have to ignore me like this. Our Solar Fire Hall is willing to buy this purple vein. If you sell it to our Solar Fire Hall, it will be sufficient to form a good relationship with our Solar Fire Hall. The elder looked at Chu Fengmian with flickering eyes. He was determined to get this purple meridian. Since Chu Fengmian wasn't willing to sell it to him, he was going to pester him to the end. How annoying! Eclipse Hall? What does the Avalon of 5 Elements have to do with us? Even Luo Kong, who was standing at the side, looked a little impatient. He wasn't a good-tempered person, and his face revealed some anger when he saw the elder pestering him again and again. You should be careful with your words. The prestige of our Eclipse Hall cannot be insulted. The elder snorted coldly when he heard Luo Kang's words. If you hand over the purple meridian today, you can form good karma with our Eclipse Hall. Otherwise, scram. Chu Fengmian didn't wait for the elder to finish speaking and shouted coldly. Originally, he was too lazy to bother with the old man in front of him and just wanted to send him away. He didn't expect the old man to be so difficult to deal with like a piece of dog skin plaster. When these words were spoken, the elder's expression turned extremely gloomy. The fury in his heart was about to explode. He wished that he could snatch the purple vein from Chu Fengmian's hands right now. However, this place was the Heaven Corner City. Even if he had a great background, he would not dare to make a move in the Heaven Corner City to snatch the items of others. Humph! The old man snorted coldly. He glared at Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong, then turned around and left. From the looks of it, the old man was clearly not going to let the matter rest. Solar Flame Hall. It's said that the young master of the Solar Flame Hall, young Master Rian, is also in Sky Horn City. This young Master Rian cultivates a body cultivation technique. Purple meridians should be what he needs. Luo Kong said to Chu Fengmian as he watched the old man leave. This young Master Rian can be considered a genius. He's ranked over 400 on the Great Haven Law Genius ranking. Luo Kong had been in the Great Haven Law star field for dozens of years, so he had some understanding of the forces and geniuses of the various sections. He had already guessed the reason why the old man came over to ask for the purple vein. Young Master Rian? It's nothing. If he dares to provoke me, I'll kill him and destroy the Solar Flame Hall. Chu Fengmian calmly spoke without even blinking his eyes. Chu Fengmian didn't care about the Solar Flame Hall right now. But if they really provoked Chu Fengmian, they would be courting death. That's right. A mere Solar Flame Hall is nothing compared to our Holy Dragon sect. It's fine if we kill them. In any case, the disciples of the 4 major forces often kill each other outside. Luo Kong nodded his head when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. Suddenly, he looked at a huge wooden building to the side. The words Stone Peak Trading Company were written on the wooden building. The auction of the Stone Peak Trading Company is actually being held today. Senior brother, are you interested in taking a look? Luo Kong turned his head and asked Chu Fengmian. The Stone Peak Trading Company is the largest trading company in Sky Horn City. It's said that it was established by a former city lord of Sky Horn City. It has an unparalleled status in Sky Horn City. Those who can enter the auction are at least of the sacred elixir grade. Treasures like the purple vein are also quite common. We're going to the immortal burial continent. It's very dangerous. If we can buy a few treasures from the auction, it'll be much safer. The immortal burial continent was a place where even Emperor Gu would face the risk of dying if he recklessly entered. The two of them didn't enter the immortal burial continent immediately after arriving at Sky Horn City. Instead, they strolled around Sky Horn City, intending to get a few treasures to protect themselves. Auction? Alright, we can go and take a look. Chu Fengmian's eyes lit up. He liked this kind of auction the most. After all, he was rich and could buy many good things. Moreover, Chu Fengmian had read countless ancient books and had a deep understanding of many heavenly treasures and treasures. Some heavenly treasures that ordinary people didn't know about would be extremely useful in Chu Fengmian's hands. This time, Chu Fengmian had already obtained 4 or 5 sacred elixirs that had gone extinct hundreds of thousands of years ago. If he bought some more, he could use the ancient sacred elixir recipe recorded in his mind to refine the ancient sacred elixir. Ancient spiritual pills were immortal medicines that were effective for ancient emperors and even immortals. Refining one would be of great use to Chu Fengmian. Let's go. We'll go in now. Luo Kong led Chu Fengmian into the Stone Peak Trading Company. The wooden building outside the Stone Peak Trading Company was just a disguise. When they stepped in, they arrived at an independent space. There were many young girls standing at the entrance. They were all in the life and death realm. When they saw Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong walk in, they quickly came to greet them. Seniors, what do you need? Our Stone Peak Trading Company has recently received a batch of sacred elixirs for healing. Are you interested? The young girl looked at Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong and asked. Recently, the immortal burial continent had opened, and sacred elixirs for healing had become a hot commodity. The price of a single sacred elixir had increased by several folds. After all, they were going to the immortal burial continent. They had to prepare enough sacred elixirs for the trip. The immortal burial continent was full of danger. Otherwise, there was a high chance of dying inside. We're here to participate in the auction. Chapter 1335. Seniors, may I know who you are? The girl looked at Luo Kong and Chu Fengmian and asked after hesitating for a moment. The auction held by Shifeng Trading Company was the largest auction in Sky Horn City. Ordinary martial artists and demon gods were not qualified to participate in it. Normally, only those who were at least 6 tribulation true emperors were qualified to participate in it. Of course, those who were not strong enough were also qualified to participate. Luo Kong was not surprised. He took out a jade talisman and shook it. The 2 words Sacred Dragon were emitting a dazzling purple light. So the 2 of you are disciples of the Sacred Dragon's secret realm. The girl's expression changed when she saw the jade talisman. She quickly said, "The 2 of you, please follow me." The girl's sudden change was not only because of her identity as a disciple of the Sacred Dragon's secret realm, but also because of the purple light emitted from her face. This purple light meant that Luo Kong was a core disciple of the Sacred Dragon's secret realm. Core disciples were second only to the chosen in the Sacred Dragon's secret realm. Their status was higher than many elders. Naturally, they were qualified to participate in the auction in Sky Horn City. The girl walked at the front and led Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong into a private room inside the trading company. The private room was luxuriously decorated and could accommodate dozens of people. It was obviously prepared for guests of high status. There was a water mirror in the private room. The scene outside was shown through the water mirror. Outside, there was a venue that could accommodate tens of thousands of people. At the center of the venue was a grandstand, surrounded by densely packed seats. At the very end of these seats was a private room, where Chu Fengmian and the others were now. Why don't you stay and explain to us what's up for auction? Luo Kong glanced at the girl and said, Yes. The girl did not refuse and replied respectfully. Then, she entered the private room together with Luo Kong. When the three of them stepped into the private room, all the restrictions in the room were activated. These restrictions were enough to prevent Emperor Gu from seeing the inside of the private room. There were no secret. After the three of them took their seats, they could see from the water mirror that there were already a few girls walking out of the auction venue. These girls held jade bottles in their hands as they came to the grandstand. The auction had officially begun. Each of these jade bottles contained 10 green-colored elixirs. There was a total of 10 jade bottles. These green elixirs were densely packed with elixir markings. Each elixir had 100 markings. They were 100 markings sacred elixirs. The grade of sacred elixirs were determined by their markings. For example, the sacred elixir pill that Chu Fengmian used to buy the purple veins only had a few markings. In terms of value, it was incomparable to the green sacred elixirs in the jade bottle. What's inside should be the flesh rejuvenation pill. Luo Kong glanced at the elixirs stored in the water mirror and said, "The refining technique is pretty good. Normally, the flesh-returning pill should only have 50 to 60 pill veins. This level of pill can be considered a small peak-grade flesh-returning pill." Senior is right. The Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce specially invited a master from the Medicine King family to refine this batch of flesh rejuvenation elixirs. One pill is enough to bring anyone below Emperor Gu back to life. The girl explained from the side. "It doesn't matter if my body is destroyed. Senior brother, are you interested?" Luo Kong glanced at it and shook his head. He did not cultivate his body. His body was extremely fragile. If it was destroyed during a battle, he could just rebuild it. There was no need to waste elixirs to recover. The price of a flesh rejuvenation elixir of this grade was not cheap. "It's useless to me." Chu Fengmian shook his head. Unlike Luo Kong, Chu Fengmian's body was too strong. Even Emperor Gu's body was not as tough as Chu Fengmian's. The effect of the flesh rejuvenation elixir was almost useless on Chu Fengmian. Only a sacred elixir with 500 markings or even 1,000 markings would be useful to Chu Fengmian. 500 great Luo elixirs. 700 great Luo elixirs. 1,000 great Luo elixirs. While Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong were talking, the auction outside the water mirror had already begun. There were 100 flesh rejuvenation elixirs in the 10 jade bottles. They were being auctioned in groups of 10. The first group was being auctioned. Great Luo elixirs? What kind of elixirs are these? Chu Fengmian asked Luo Kong when he heard the shouts outside. These great Luo elixirs are elixirs used as hard currency in the Daluotian star field. Its effect is similar to the Sacred Dragon Grand Elixir in the Sacred Dragon Secret Realm, but its grade is not as good. One Sacred Dragon Grand Elixir is equivalent to 10 great Luo elixirs outside. Luo Kong explained. Of course, it's not necessary to take out great Luo elixirs to buy things in the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. As long as it's a treasure of sufficient value, the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce will have a specialized appraiser to estimate the price. It's a fair trade. That's right. The Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce will definitely not let the two seniors suffer a loss. The young lady at the side also spoke. For example, many Emperor Gu wouldn't carry many low-grade elixirs like the great Luo elixirs with them. Most of the time, they would use items to exchange for money. Is that so? I wonder if the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce accepts spirit stones? Chu Fengmian thought for a moment, then suddenly asked the young lady at the side. Spirit stones. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, the young lady was first stunned. Generally, only cultivators below the Quasi-Emperor realm would use spirit stones to trade. In Sky Horn City, great Luo elixirs were hard currency. As for spirit stones, they were circulated among some low-level cultivators. However, the young lady didn't show much surprise and directly answered. Yes, but it must be a high-grade spirit stone. It must be at least a royal-grade spirit stone. Then how many great Luo elixirs can this spirit stone be exchanged for? A fist-sized spirit stone suddenly appeared in Chu Fengmian's palm. This spirit stone was milky white, and the moment it was taken out, it emitted an extremely pure spiritual energy. This is a saint-grade spirit stone? A saint-grade spirit stone? No, it's purer than a saint-grade spirit stone. This spirit stone is enough to set up a supreme array. The young lady was shocked when she saw this spirit stone. She had seen saint-grade spirit stones before, but it was still inferior to the one in Chu Fengmian's hand. Chapter 1336. Spirit stones were no longer of much use to cultivators in the Emperor land. The cultivation of the Emperor realm mainly required the power of heaven and earth, and the power of heaven and earth principles. Therefore, great overarching pills and jade dragon pills that contained the power of heaven and earth were the hard currency among the Emperor realm masters. However, this did not mean that high-quality spirit stones were useless. On the contrary, high-quality spirit stones were almost impossible to be condensed by humans. Even Emperor Gu could not condense saint-grade spirit stones. They could only be found in ancient spirit springs. High-quality spirit stones were necessary to activate spirit arrays. All the major sects would buy them in large quantities to store them. For example, the number of spirit stones consumed by the transmission array in the Sacred Dragon Mystery Domain every day was astronomical. Moreover, the spirit stones consumed were at least emperor grade. Sovereigns might not care about spirit stones below the royal grade. However, even some ancient emperors would want to purchase royal grade or even saint grade spirit stones. I need to ask the elders about the value of this spirit stone. The girl looked at it and said hurriedly. She could not set a price for a spirit stone of this level. Go ahead. Chu Fengmian handed the saint-grade spirit stone to the girl directly. Then, he looked indifferent. Chu Fengmian had already condensed a lot of such spirit stones. He had a divine vein. When he was comprehending the primogenitor statue, he was constantly devouring spirit stones to condense spirit stones. Now, Chu Fengmian's empty ring was filled with saint-grade spirit stones. Of course, Chu Fengmian did not care about such a spirit stone. Moreover, with the reputation of the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce, they would not dare to take Chu Fengmian's spirit stone. Yes, please wait for a moment. The girl took the spirit stone and left hurriedly. Luo Kong, who was next to her, looked at Chu Fengmian with a good look. Senior brother, do you have a lot of such high-quality spirit stones? Luo Kong asked. Can you let me have a look? Take it. Chu Fengmian pointed his finger and a spirit stone flew out and fell into Luo Kang's hand. It's so pure. Although it's only a saint-grade spirit stone, it's much purer than all the saint-grade spirit stones I've seen before. This spirit stone has already reached the peak of saint grade. It's only a step away from reaching the legendary divine grade. Luo Kong looked at Chu Fengmian carefully and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. May I know how many saint-grade spirit stones you have with you? What? Do you need something? Chu Fengmian was taken aback by Luo Kang's words. He didn't expect Luo Kong to be interested in saint-grade spirit stones. That's right. To be honest with you, I have a slaughter formation here that requires a large amount of spirit stones to activate. Royal tier spirit stones can only bring out less than 30% of its power, and even saint tier spirit stones can only bring out 70% of its power. Luo Kong said. If these saint-grade spirit stones are used to activate this killing formation, I'm afraid it will be able to unleash its full power. I'm willing to exchange them for 10 contribution points each. 10 contribution points in exchange for 1? Chu Fengmian was taken aback when he heard the price. He did not expect a spiritual stone at the peak of the divine grade to be so valuable. Chu Fengmian had hundreds of millions of saint-grade spirit stones in his possession. Moreover, as long as Chu Fengmian was willing, he could condense millions of them every day. If they were exchanged for contribution points, they would be endless. However, Chu Fengmian quickly calmed down after thinking about it for a while. The price of a saint-grade spirit stone was indeed high, but the rarer something was, the more valuable it was. Moreover, those who needed saint-grade spirit stones were only experts who needed them to activate the formation. For most sovereigns, saint-grade spirit stones were valuable, but they wouldn't waste their wealth to buy them. At the very least, it wasn't easy to make a fortune. However, it was enough for Chu Fengmian to buy as much as he wanted in the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. "Junior brother, if you want them, just take them." Chu Fengmian glanced at Luo Kong and laughed. Then, he threw an empty ring to him. The empty ring was filled with 100,000 saint-grade spirit stones. It wasn't difficult for Chu Fengmian to condense saint-grade spirit stones. Instead of exchanging them for contribution points, he might as well give them to Luo Kong. After coming to the Sacred Dragon's secret realm, Luo Kong had been taking Chu Fengmian to various places. It was his compensation. Luo Kong was shocked when he opened the empty ring. He thought Chu Fengmian would give him a few thousand saint-grade spirit stones. He didn't expect Chu Fengmian to be so generous. In that case, junior brother won't stand on ceremony. If senior brother needs anything in the future, please don't hesitate to ask. Luo Kong didn't stand on ceremony anymore. He laughed and his relationship with Chu Fengmian improved. Two seniors. At this moment, the girl returned to the private room and came to Chu Fengmian. "Our Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce is willing to buy this saint-grade spirit stone for 100 great Luo pills." 100 great Luo pills was worth 10 contribution points. It was the same price as Luo Kang's offer. It seemed that the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce was honest and didn't lower the price. "Very well. Let's just buy it. We'll just pay according to the price of the saint-grade spirit stones later." Chu Fengmian was in a great mood after obtaining this result. Originally, Chu Fengmian didn't have much wealth because he had spent all his contribution points on comprehending the primogenitor statue. Now that he could use saint-grade spirit stones to pay, Chu Fengmian didn't have any scruples when buying things. It was enough for him to squander as much as he wanted. Chu Fengmian looked at Shui Jing. In the auction house, the first bottle of 10 muscle rejuvenation pills had been sold for 200,000 great Luo pills. Normally, the price of a single muscle rejuvenation pill would be around 150,000 great Luo pills. However, due to the opening of the Immortal Burial Continent, the price of healing saint-grade spirit pills had soared. The 10 muscle rejuvenation pills were worth 200,000 great Luo pills. However, the price had already risen to the limit. If it was any more expensive, no one would buy it. The next 9 bottles of flesh rejuvenation pills were quickly auctioned off. They were all sold for around 200,000 and were bought by different powerhouses. Next up were a few more bottles of healing saint-grade spirit pills. Most of them were similar in grade to the muscle rejuvenation pills. The most expensive ones only had around 200 pill veins. Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong weren't very interested. They only took a quick glance and chatted. Very quickly, an hour passed. Just as Chu Fengmian was feeling a little sleepy, a young girl suddenly walked out with a jade box. An ancient medicinal fragrance wafted from the jade box. An ancient saint-grade spirit medicine. Chapter 1337. Ancient sacred medicine was also a kind of sacred medicine, but it was a name given to the extinct sacred medicines. Purple veins was a kind of ancient sacred medicine. These extinct sacred medicines didn't disappear completely. For example, in a place like the Immortal Burial Continent, there would be many ancient sacred medicines appearing every time they appeared in the world. Chu Fengmian knew a large number of ancient sacred elixir recipes. As long as he had enough ancient sacred medicines, he could refine the legendary ancient sacred elixir. What a strong medicinal power! This is at least an ancient grade sacred medicine. Ancient sacred medicines were divided into 3 grades: ancient, ancient, and archaic. Archaic was the highest and archaic was the lowest. Purple veins was an ancient grade sacred medicine. Chu Fengmian had not seen the ancient sacred medicine in front of him. However, based on the medicinal power, Chu Fengmian guessed that it was at least an ancient-grade sacred medicine. This is an ancient-grade sacred medicine, the azure cloud fruit. If swallowed directly, it could transform one's body into an azure cloud body. It could give one half of the power of an innate godly body. It is enough to transform one's body. A loud voice was heard from the spectator's stand. It attracted many people's attention. Azure cloud fruit. It's actually the azure cloud fruit? This is good stuff. If swallowed directly, one could cultivate an azure cloud godly body. Although it is not as good as an innate godly body, it is much stronger than an ordinary body. That's right. Moreover, the azure cloud godly body does not conflict with the innate godly body. It can stimulate the power of the innate godly body. Once a martial artist with an innate godly body devours it, the power of the innate godly body will improve further. Not only that, it can even stimulate the power of the demon race's bloodline. It is an auxiliary sacred medicine. This kind of thing has appeared this time. The Shifeng Chamber of Commerce is actually auctioning it? I must get it. If I can get my hands on it, it will be enough to improve my bloodline further. A demon god said crazily. There was no greed in his eyes. He could not wait to snatch the azure cloud fruit. Although the azure cloud fruit was an ancient-grade sacred medicine, its price was higher than an ancient-grade sacred medicine every time it appeared. Almost all of them were sold at sky-high prices. This was because the jade cloud fruit was simply too useful. It was of great use to martialists, fey immortals, and both extremely talented and ordinary martialists. There was almost no expert who didn't need the jade cloud fruit. As a result, every time the jade cloud fruit appeared, there would be a lot of competition, and the price would rise. It's actually this thing? Chu Fengmian looked at the jade cloud fruit with surprise in his eyes. He had only seen the azure cloud fruit in ancient books. In his previous life, the master of the sword Dao had once gone to look for the azure cloud fruit, wanting to see if Chu Fengmian could cultivate the azure cloud divine physique. However, the master of the sword Dao came up empty-handed. The jade cloud fruit had been extremely rare for thousands of years. This time, it had actually appeared in the Shifeng Chamber of Commerce and was even being auctioned. I must get this jade cloud fruit. The moment Chu Fengmian saw the jade cloud fruit, he made up his mind to get his hands on it. Now that Chu Fengmian had cultivated the arts of the 5 chaotic emperors and swallowed the ice and fire divine stones, he had cultivated the ice and fire divine physique. He could be said to be a martialist with the innate divine physique. This jade cloud fruit was enough to stimulate the potential of the innate divine physique. Martialists with the innate divine physique could not unleash all the potential of the innate divine physique in their entire life. This jade cloud fruit was a shortcut. Directly refining it could stimulate the potential in advance. To Chu Fengmian, this jade cloud fruit was of great use. It was enough to improve the power of the ice and fire divine physique. Chu Fengmian's ice and fire divine physique would erupt with greater power as Chu Fengmian's realm increased. It would subtly strengthen Chu Fengmian's power. Originally, Chu Fengmian had wanted to find other divine stones to continue swallowing and cultivating the arts of the 5 chaotic emperors. However, such divine stones were difficult to find. Even now, Chu Fengmian had never heard of them in the Sacred Dragon Mystery Dimension. With the 5 elements divine stone as a backup, he could only give up temporarily. Now that he had encountered the jade cloud fruit, Chu Fengmian had no reason to give up. Everyone present should be clear about the effects of the jade cloud fruit. Our Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce only has 1 jade cloud fruit. Everyone, please don't miss it. The starting price is 1 million great luo elixirs. When the crowd's discussion gradually died down, a voice suddenly rang out from the spectator's stand. 1 million great luo elixirs. This starting price alone was enough to make many martialists change their expressions. However, this price was not enough to deter everyone. The value of the jade cloud fruit was far more than this price. 2 million. A woman's voice suddenly rang out from the box next door. The moment he opened his mouth, he directly doubled the price. This voice. Hearing that voice, the crowd immediately turned their gazes over. He could vaguely see that there was a young girl sitting in the box. The Princess of the Sea? This voice is not bad. It's the Princess of the Sea from Sea Capital. The Princess of the Sea, Hai Xian. A series of discussions took place. The Princess of the Sea, Hai Xian? Who is she? Chu Fengmian could also see that this young lady had a shocking background. Otherwise, everyone present would not be so surprised. He could not help but turn his head and look at Luo Kong. Luo Kong immediately said, "The Princess of the Sea, Hai Xian, is a super genius from Sea Capital. Her father is an Sea King from Sea Capital. There are a total of 4 Sea Kings in Sea Capital. They are all terrifying existences at the level of the 9 tribulations Emperor Gu. Hai Xian's talent is said to be even more terrifying than her father's. She is known as the Princess of Sea Capital." Luo Kang's tone was a little nervous when he mentioned the qualifier. Hai Xian is only a quasi-emperor now, but she is already ranked around 100 on the Great Luo Genius ranking. A quasi-emperor ranked 100 on the Great Luo Genius ranking. Chu Fengmian did not care much about Luo Kang's previous words. He only wanted to prove that Hai Xian had a strong background. However, the last sentence made Chu Fengmian take it seriously. With Luo Kang's current strength, he could only be ranked between 50 and 70 on the Great Luo Genius ranking. Hai Xian was ranked around 100? Moreover, she was only a quasi-emperor? If all this was true, Hai Xian was definitely one of the most monstrous geniuses that Chu Fengmian had ever met. 2,500,000. Chapter 1338. The Princess of the Sea had a noble status. If it had been any other item, perhaps everyone would have given her some face. After all, the Princess of the Sea had the potential to become Emperor Gu in the future. Everyone even predicted that the Princess of the Sea would become the Sea Emperor of the Sea Capital because of her father. That was why she was called the Princess of the Sea. At this moment, giving the Princess of the Sea some face and building a good relationship with her would definitely be beneficial in the future. However, the item being auctioned this time was the Jade Cloud Fruit. A single stalk of Emerald Cloud Fruit was enough to turn a trash into a genius, improving the talent of a genius. There were many people who wanted to compete for the Jade Cloud Fruit. Many of them had backgrounds that were not inferior to the Princess of the Sea. Of course, they would not let the Princess of the Sea get the Jade Cloud Fruit. 3 million. The Princess of the Sea, who was in the private room beside Chu Fengmian, raised the price again. Someone broke the stalemate. At this moment, many people who were afraid of offending the Princess of the Sea continued to bid. The price of the Jade Cloud Fruit was rising steadily. This is good stuff. Even if this Jade Cloud Fruit is given to me, it will be of great use to me. It's a pity that I will go bankrupt if I bid for this Jade Cloud Fruit. Luo Kong could not help but say when he saw the crowd competing for the Jade Cloud Fruit. Even if he obtained the Jade Cloud Fruit, he would benefit greatly. However, the price he had to pay to obtain the Jade Cloud Fruit was not something he could bear. It was not worth it for him to go bankrupt just to buy a Jade Cloud Fruit. After all, he did not have an innate divine body. Obtaining the Jade Cloud Fruit would only strengthen his body and transform it into the Jade Cloud Divine Body. Although it was not bad, it could only unleash 20 to 30% of the Jade Cloud Fruit's effect. It was not worth it to go bankrupt. Senior brother, it seems that you are determined to get the Jade Cloud Fruit. Luo Kong looked at Chu Fengmian and said. Although Chu Fengmian hadn't made a bid, he could tell that Chu Fengmian was determined to get the Jade Cloud Fruit. However, it was not yet time for Chu Fengmian to bid. I'm afraid the final price of this Jade Cloud Fruit will be 100 million. Senior brother, you have to consider it. Luo Kong could not help but remind him. 100 million great Luo pills. If converted to the contribution points of the Holy Dragon Mystery Ground, it would be a total of 10 million contribution points. It was a sum that could practically bankrupt a core disciple. Although the jade cloud fruit was good, if the price was too high, it was not worth it. It's fine, Chu Fengmian replied casually. He didn't look confident at all. When it came to wealth, Chu Fengmian had never been afraid of anyone. Since Chu Fengmian had come across the jade cloud fruit, there was no reason for him to let it go. 20 million great luo pills. While they were talking, the price of the jade cloud core had already risen steadily. Only the ancient emperor and some martial artists from large factions with powerful backgrounds would have the qualifications to fork out such wealth. Most of the martial artists and Yao gods present were unable to continue fighting for it. They couldn't take out 20 million great overarching pills. Furthermore, everyone knew that this was far from the true price of the azure cloud fruit. Every time the azure cloud fruit appeared, it would be auctioned for hundreds of millions. 30 million great luo pills. The Princess of the Sea raised the bid again. She sounded a little impatient as she increased the price by another 10 million. Everyone could only smile bitterly when they saw this method of increasing the price. To them, great overarching pills were something they had to spend with their fingers. The Princess of the Sea was really throwing away money like crazy. However, the Princess of the Sea was indeed richer than Emperor Gu. She didn't feel the pinch when she increased the price. 31 million. After the Princess of the Sea raised the bid, another voice called out. It was a middle-aged man. His voice contained the power of heaven and earth. This was an aura that only Emperor Gu had. It was Emperor Gu who had been competing with the Princess of the Sea for the jade cloud fruit. However, it was clear that Emperor Gu didn't have his great luo pills for free. Every time he raised the bid, it was only 1 million higher than the Princess of the Sea. 40 million. The Princess of the Sea casually raised the bid again. 41 million. This ancient emperor spoke again. However, from his tone, it seemed like he was starting to lose his confidence before he could even shout out a single word. After all, even he had to calculate whether he would make a loss or a gain by buying the jade cloud fruit. On the other hand, the Princess of the Sea wasn't confident at all. After she raised the bid, she shouted out another number. 50 million. When this number was raised, Emperor Gu fell silent. The price of 50 million great luo pills had already exceeded the number that Emperor Gu had in mind. Everyone present fell silent. 50 million great luo pills might not be worth it to buy a jade cloud fruit. Many ancient sacred herbs would definitely appear when the celestial burial continent opened. This price was enough to buy many ancient sacred herbs, unless one had an innate godly body and was determined to get the jade cloud fruit. Otherwise, this price might not be worth it. Everyone fell silent. Just when everyone thought that the jade cloud fruit would be bought by the Princess of the Sea, a voice rang out. Suddenly, a slow voice rang out. 60 million. The person who spoke was naturally Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian couldn't be bothered to compete with a group of people. He had been waiting until the last moment to speak. When Chu Fengmian spoke, everyone was shocked. Many people looked at Chu Fengmian's private room. Chu Fengmian hadn't spoken since the beginning. Now, he suddenly opened his mouth to compete for the jade cloud fruit. However, due to the restriction on the box, no matter how hard everyone looked, they could only see a blurry figure. The Princess of the Sea was stunned. She didn't expect someone to make a bid at this moment. Soon, she opened her mouth again and raised the price even higher. 70 million, 80 million. Chu Fengmian followed closely behind and raised the price. Although Chu Fengmian didn't make a bid at the beginning, it seemed that he was determined to get the jade cloud fruit. Where did this kid come from? This voice is so unfamiliar. How can an unknown kid have the wealth to compete with the Princess of the Sea? I don't think there's such a kid in the four great forces. If he isn't from the four great forces, where is he from? With such wealth, could he be the young master of that big chamber of commerce? Someone who could take out 80 million great luo pills in one go couldn't be a nobody. Even Emperor Gu might not be able to take out so much wealth in one go. However, Chu Fengmian's voice sounded familiar to everyone. This made everyone puzzled. Chapter 1339. At first, everyone thought that the jade cloud fruit had already been decided. Who knew that Chu Fengmian would suddenly appear at this moment? The bid of 80 million silenced the Princess of the Sea. She seemed to be calculating the gains and losses of buying the jade cloud fruit. Where did this arrogant fellow come from? How dare he compete with the Princess of the Sea? Since the Princess of the Sea likes the jade cloud fruit, I will buy it and give it to her. At this moment, an extremely arrogant voice suddenly rang out from the private room beside the Princess of the Sea. I bid 90 million. Along with the sound of this voice, the auction hall became even more lively. It's young Master Rian. Young Master Rian is here too. Rian Hall is known as one of the best alchemy palaces in the Avalon of 5 elements. It is said that young Master Rian has been pursuing the Princess of the Sea. Interesting. I wonder if this fellow dares to compete with young Master Rian in terms of wealth. The moment the person in the box spoke, many of the cultivators present recognized this person. Everyone knew that young Master Rian had been pursuing the Princess of the Sea. Now that he had encountered this opportunity, young Master Rian would definitely not let it go. Fellow, if you dare to compete with the Princess of the Sea, you will have to get past me first. After young Master Rian made his bid, he deliberately glanced at Chu Fengmian's box. His tone was provocative. He had been pursuing the Princess of the Sea but had not had the chance. Now that he had met Chu Fengmian and the Princess of the Sea, he decided to buy the jade cloud fruit directly to please the Princess of the Sea. It's just a small amount of money. 100 million. Chu Fengmian smiled casually and made another bid. To Chu Fengmian, it did not matter if it was 100 million or 200 million. He had the holy pulse, which was like a money-printing machine. He could take out large amounts of spirit stones at any time. Chu Fengmian was only after the bean fruit. As for other things like jealousy, Chu Fengmian couldn't be bothered to care. 110 million. Young Master Rian said proudly when he heard Chu Fengmian's bid. His wealth was shocking. He did not care if he spent a lot of money to please the Princess of the Sea. The Solar Fire Hall might not be the strongest power in the Avalon of 5 elements, but it was definitely one of the wealthiest. Being the master of the Eclipse Hall, the Avalon of 5 elements alchemy techniques, his wealth was rolling in. As the young master of the Eclipse Hall, his wealth was not small either. Brat, if you have the ability, why don't you follow me? After Riflame young master reported the price, he snorted coldly. When it came to wealth, he had never been afraid of anyone. Forget it. It's too troublesome to increase it bit by bit. Let's just double it. 200 million. Chu Fengmian shot a glance at Riflame young master and casually shouted another bid. When the price was announced, Luo Kong, who was beside Chu Fengmian, was startled. The young lady was even more startled. 200 million. This is too crazy. What kind of person is this? How could he have such an astonishing amount of wealth? 200 million to buy a jade cloud fruit? Is it really worth it? What a prodigal! Hearing this price, many people in the auction house were dumbfounded. The price had doubled in an instant. This wasn't a few thousand or tens of thousands of great luo elixirs, but 100 million. 100 million great luo elixirs. Most martialists didn't dare to imagine how it would feel to have so much wealth piled up in front of them. In particular, the price of a jade cloud fruit was about 100 million. Most of the time, it could even be bought for less than 100 million. Now that Chu Fengmian had doubled the price, it was simply crazy. Senior brother, this price isn't worth it. Luo Kong couldn't help but speak up. 200 million great luo elixirs for a jade cloud fruit was definitely not worth it. This had already become a dispute over personal feelings. It's only 200 million. No harm done. Chu Fengmian spoke casually, as if he didn't take it to heart. This calmness made it seem as if the person who had just bid wasn't Chu Fengmian. 200 million great Luo elixirs was equivalent to 2 million sacred-grade spirit stones. Chu Fengmian now had hundreds of millions of sacred-grade spirit stones, so this was nothing to him. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, Luo Kang's face changed a little. 200 million great Luo elixirs. Even if it was him, he would probably go bankrupt if he took it out in a single breath. But now, it seemed that Chu Fengmian was doing it so easily. This was what it meant to be infuriated. Not only did Chu Fengmian's strength surpass him, but Chu Fengmian's wealth was also much greater than his. 200 million. Is there anyone who would like to bid higher? The old man on the auction stage had just recovered from the shock of the price and spoke up. The scene was dead silent. Everyone's eyes were looking at the room where Riflame young master was. A pauper like you shouldn't think of trying to stand out. Chu Fengmian's voice rang out from the room. Chu Fengmian was a vengeful person. Since Riflame young master dared to provoke him, there was no reason for Chu Fengmian to let him go. Pauper. Hearing this form of address, the expressions of everyone present became incomparably strange. They were naturally able to tell who this poor bastard was referring to. Riflame young master. If the young master of Riflame Hall was addressed as a pauper, then what were they? They couldn't even be considered paupers. However, no one could refute Chu Fengmian's words. A person who could take out 200 million great Luo elixirs to buy a jade cloud fruit was indeed qualified. Brat, you're courting death. Boom. A berserk aura erupted from Riflame young master. The address of a pauper was simply driving him crazy. A terrifying killing intent had already shrouded Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian completely ignored Riflame young master's killing intent and spoke again. What's wrong? If you don't have enough wealth, then get lost. This isn't a place for paupers. Good. Good. Brat, didn't you want to compete with me? Then let's compete. 210 million. Riflame young master took a deep breath and shouted angrily. Spending 200 million for a jade cloud fruit was definitely something a fool would do. However, with his status, he absolutely couldn't allow Chu Fengmian to address him as a pauper. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't sell it in this auction, Riflame young master would have already killed Chu Fengmian. 300 million. Chu Fengmian shouted out another number and the price soared by another 100 million. 310 million, Riflame young master said in a deep voice. 400 million. 400 million. 500 million. Chapter 1340. 500 million. Is it worth it just for a jade cloud fruit? Many of the martialists present were dumbfounded as they watched the price rise. 500 million great overarching pills was enough to buy 6 or 7 jade cloud fruit. Now, a large amount of wealth was being thrown out for the sake of personal feelings. Kid, don't go overboard. Riflame young master slammed the table and stood up when he heard the price of 500 million. Young master Rian bellowed furiously. His eyes were filled with killing intent. He could already tell that Chu Fengmian wasn't trying to obtain the jade cloud fruit. Chu Fengmian was just trying to slap him in the face. Kid, you better think carefully before making an enemy out of Riflame Hall. I'll give you a chance. Hand over the jade cloud fruit obediently. Otherwise, what else can I do? A mere Riflame Hall is nothing in my eyes. Chu Fengmian didn't care about Riflame young master's threat as he sneered. Scram if you can't take out your wealth. Don't threaten me. Chu Fengmian's reply was extremely unyielding. He even said that he did not place the Sunflame Hall in his eyes. Is this kid planning to make an enemy out of Riflame Hall? Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, everyone present was startled. Once those words were spoken, there was absolutely no possibility of reconciliation with the Solar Flame Hall. After all, Riflame Hall belonged to the Avalon of 5 elements and was one of the 4 major powers. Ordinary martialists would be eager to curry favor with Riflame Hall. How many people would dare to make an enemy out of Riflame Hall? Good, very good. Riflame young master's expression changed when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. His expression kept changing until it calmed down after a long while. Kid, I'll give you the jade cloud fruit today. However, you have to take good care of such a treasure. Otherwise, it won't be worth it if someone kills you and steals it. Riflame young master sat down after he finished speaking and stopped arguing. However, everyone was able to hear the killing intent in Riflame young master's words. Many people looked at Chu Fengmian and shook their heads. It wasn't worth offending Riflame Hall for a jade cloud fruit. However, it didn't matter to Chu Fengmian whether it was worth it or not. He just wanted to get the jade cloud fruit. Moreover, Chu Fengmian clearly remembered that the old man who wanted to buy Chu Fengmian's purple meridians was from Riflame Hall. Originally, Chu Fengmian didn't bother to find trouble with Riflame Hall. However, since Riflame young master had delivered himself to him, he couldn't be blamed. The jade cloud core was taken away by a woman on the grandstand, and the next item was brought up. The auction continued. Senior brother, young Master Rian is a despicable person. He will definitely not let this matter rest. Furthermore, although the Rian Hall isn't strong, they have a pretty good relationship with many experts due to their medicine concocting skills. In order to curry favor with young Master Rian, many experts might come looking for trouble. Luo Kong reminded from the side. Although ancient emperor won't take action, there should be plenty of Six Tribulation true emperors willing to work for Riflame young noble. Chu Fengmian didn't care at all. A Six Tribulation true emperor was nothing to him. With his current strength, he could easily kill anyone as long as he didn't meet any of the top geniuses on the Grand Luo Genius ranking. Once Chu Fengmian obtained the Jade Cloud Fruit, his Ice-Fire Divine physique would improve further. He was confident that he could challenge the top 100 geniuses on the Grand Luo Genius ranking. From then on, Riflame young master would be obedient and avoid Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian could spare his life, but if he dared to cause trouble, Chu Fengmian wouldn't mind crushing him to death. He would kill any Six Tribulation true emperor that came. Luo Kang's jaw dropped after hearing this. He was speechless for a long time. Chu Fengmian's confidence made Luo Kang understand that Chu Fengmian's strength was much stronger than he had imagined. He had underestimated Chu Fengmian. Luo Kang was naturally calm since the person involved didn't care. Their Holy Dragon sect wasn't a pushover. He wasn't afraid even if Riflame Hall came for revenge. While they were talking, a knock came from outside the box. Come in. As Chu Fengmian spoke, the door to the private room slowly opened. A woman walked in with a jade box in her arms. Inside the jade box was the jade cloud fruit that Chu Fengmian had just won. Give it to me. Chu Fengmian glanced at the jade cloud fruit and made a grabbing motion. The jade box flew out from the woman's hand. The woman's expression changed when she saw this. She was a quasi-emperor. In terms of cultivation, she was one level higher than Chu Fengmian. But now, Chu Fengmian had snatched the jade box from her hand with a wave of his hand. She didn't even have the chance to react. If Chu Fengmian wanted to kill her, she would have already become a corpse. Chu Fengmian didn't care about the woman's thoughts. He picked up the jade box and opened it with a flick of his finger. A rich medicinal fragrance immediately assaulted his senses. The fragrance of ancient sacred herbs was even more exaggerated than sacred herbs. The entire box was filled with a rich medicinal fragrance. Chu Fengmian glanced at the jade cloud fruit in the jade box. It was indeed the same jade cloud fruit that had been auctioned earlier. I'll trade with spirit stones. Chu Fengmian moved his palm and an empty ring flew out and landed in the woman's hand. Chu Fengmian had already agreed with the Stone Peak Trading Company to trade with spirit stones. 5 million sacred-grade spirit stones were neatly placed in the ring. The woman confirmed it and left. Senior brother, aren't you afraid of scaring her? Luo Kang said with a smile when he saw the woman's fearful eyes after she left. The woman wanted to test Chu Fengmian's strength when she came in. But she was easily defeated by Chu Fengmian with a single move, and the jade box was snatched from her hand. How dare you try to test me? That's already light. If it wasn't for the fact that he sensed no hostility from the woman's probing, it wouldn't have been as simple as scaring her. Chu Fengmian's gaze fell on the jade cloud fruit in the jade box again. Under his careful observation, he could vaguely see a thin golden line on the jade cloud fruit. The golden line couldn't be seen clearly with the naked eye. Even a sovereign realm expert would have to observe it carefully for a long time to see it. Chapter 1341. It's indeed the golden-rimmed jade cloud fruit. Everyone knew that the jade cloud fruit was an ancient sacred medicine of the Middle Ages. However, very few people knew that there was another kind of jade cloud fruit, which was the golden-rimmed jade cloud fruit. The golden-rimmed jade cloud fruit would only transform when the jade cloud fruit had various fortuitous encounters during its growth. There would be a thin golden line on the surface of the jade cloud fruit. Even sovereigns would find it difficult to detect this golden line. Only people like Chu Fengmian, who knew about the golden-rimmed jade cloud fruit, could find it after careful searching. The efficacy of a golden-rimmed jade cloud fruit was 5 times stronger than an ordinary jade cloud fruit. In terms of value, it was dozens of times higher than an ordinary jade cloud fruit. Chu Fengmian had spent 500 million great luo pills to buy this jade cloud fruit. Not only did he not suffer a loss, but he also made a big profit. Let's refine it first. The efficacy of the jade cloud fruit was extremely mild, so Chu Fengmian didn't need to find a place to refine it. He picked up the jade cloud fruit and swallowed it directly. Chu Fengmian began to operate the sky-devouring secret skill in his mouth. Under the sky-devouring secret skill, the jade cloud fruit was crushed. Waves of extremely pure medicinal efficacy were released from it and began to integrate into Chu Fengmian's body. Ice and Fire Divine Body. Activate. The moment the medicinal efficacy entered Chu Fengmian's body, he activated the Ice and Fire Divine Body. Immediately, the medicinal efficacy was absorbed by the Ice and Fire Divine Body. The Ice and Fire Divine Body in Chu Fengmian's body began to become stronger after absorbing the medicinal efficacy. This jade cloud fruit was the best tonic for those with innate divine bodies. Chu Fengmian's Ice and Fire Divine Body was only at the middle level among the innate divine bodies. However, after devouring this jade cloud fruit, the power of his innate divine body had become stronger. If this continued, even if he couldn't rank in the top 10, he would be able to reach the upper level of the innate divine body. In particular, the Ice and Fire Divine Body didn't improve Chu Fengmian's current strength, but the upper limit of his strength. It didn't affect Chu Fengmian's improvement in other ways. In just a few minutes, the medicinal power of the jade cloud fruit had been completely absorbed and refined. Not a single bit had been wasted. The Ice-Fire Divine Body on Chu Fengmian's body gradually receded, causing the aura on Chu Fengmian's body to die down. However, Luo Kong, who had witnessed all of this from the side, appeared somewhat astonished. He hadn't expected Chu Fengmian to possess not only the bloodline of an innate divine beast, but also an innate divine body. Possessing both the innate divine beast bloodline and the innate divine body at the same time was simply unimaginable to him. "Senior brother, you've really hidden yourself well," Luo Kong said with a smile as he watched Chu Fengmian wake up. "You're not bad either," Chu Fengmian also said with a smile. His gaze swept over Luo Kong. Now that Chu Fengmian's divine physique of ice and fire had advanced, his spiritual sense had also become more powerful. Chu Fengmian could also see that Luo Kong was hiding countless secrets. The strength he had displayed was only the tip of the iceberg. During this period of time, a few more items were auctioned off in the auction hall. These items were all spiritual weapons and Chu Fengmian wasn't very interested in them. Chu Fengmian didn't lack spiritual weapons. Unless it was a spiritual sword that had reached the level of an extreme immortal weapon, his ancestral dragon supreme sword and titanic godly sword were sufficient. This time, Chu Fengmian had participated in the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce's auction and bought the jade cloud fruit. He had already made a profit and hadn't come in vain. Chu Fengmian wasn't interested in the next few items and didn't bid. Luo Kong only bid occasionally and finally bought a 5-element spirit. These spirits of the 5 elements were mostly needed by martial artists and fey gods who cultivated the Tao of the 5-element. Looks like that kid doesn't have much wealth left. 500 million great Luo pills. I'm afraid that he's already bankrupt. After seeing Chu Fengmian bid for the jade cloud fruit, he didn't continue bidding. Everyone present was discussing animatedly. Many people felt that Chu Fengmian was probably out of wealth. Rian Gongzi, the Princess of the Sea, and the others had already bid for many items. Soon, the auction came to an end. After another auction item was sent down, the old man on the stage slowly spoke. Today is the last item of the auction. Everyone here is here for the final treasure. Without further ado, let's bring the treasure up. This auction item seemed to be in an empty ring. A woman walked up with the empty ring and suddenly opened it. A wooden totem as tall as a person landed on the spectator's stand. This wooden totem was engraved with countless ancient patterns. Many people were puzzled when they saw it. However, in the private room, many experts stood up the moment they saw the wooden totem. Their eyes were filled with excitement. Ultimate treasure. This is Sword Tao Ultimate Treasure. These excited experts were all sword cultivators. Moreover, they were all extremely powerful sword cultivators. Even Emperor Gu was extremely excited. Sword Tao Totem? Chu Fengmian's expression changed. His eyes became incomparably serious. The wooden totem on the spectator's stand was the Sword Tao Ultimate Treasure, the Sword Tao Totem. This thing has actually spread to the extraterritorial starry sky. Chu Fengmian was immediately excited when he saw the Sword Tao Totem. At the same time, he suddenly understood why many Sword Tao Totems had gone missing in the 9 domains. It turned out that the Sword Tao Totems hadn't gone missing. Instead, they had drifted to the extraterritorial starry sky. Chu Fengmian had never imagined that he would be able to see a Sword Tao Totem in the Daluo star field. Now it was being auctioned by the Stone Peak Trading Company. I must get it. The Sword Tao Totem. It wasn't easy to find one. I must get it. Chu Fengmian was excited. He had already made up his mind. No matter what, he had to get this Sword Tao Totem. Chu Fengmian's Sword Tao had improved because he had comprehended the remnant swordsmanship behind the Sword Tao Totem. A remnant swordsmanship was enough to improve Chu Fengmian's Sword God Realm sword intent. This Sword Tao Totem was definitely related to the origin of the Sword Tao. Chu Fengmian had to get it no matter what. There were countless experts in the auction venue. They were all determined to get the Sword Tao Totem. Chu Fengmian could even feel the aura of Emperor Gu among them. Chapter 1342. At present, Chu Fengmian could feel that there were at least 10 Emperor Gu who were determined to obtain this Sword Principal Totem. Sword Principal Totem. The Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce is auctioning this item? It is said that this Sword Principal Totem does not belong to the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce, but was entrusted to the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce by a warrior. I am a swordsman. This Sword Principal Totem is said to be the ancestor of all swordsmanship in the world, the origin of all swordsmanship. If one can obtain it, the benefits will be immeasurable. Countless excited voices sounded. The Sword Principal Totem is indeed a good item. Its value is simply immeasurable. In the box, Luo Kong exclaimed the moment he saw the Sword Principal Totem. The stronger and more knowledgeable an expert was, the more they knew the value of the Sword Principal Totem. It was the origin of all swordsmanship in the world. Based on this point alone, the Sword Principal Totem was a priceless treasure. This time, the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce actually auctioned the Sword Principal Totem. It was definitely a grand event. The sword principle totem is the ultimate treasure of swordsmanship. All swordsmanship in the world comes from 19 sword principle totem. The one in front of you is ranked 3rd. Everyone should know the value of this sword principle totem. The elder in the stands looked at the sword principle totem and said, 3rd. Hearing this, countless experts looked at the sword principle totem with even more fervor. There were 19 sword principle totem in total. The higher the ranking of the sword principle totem, the stronger the swordsmanship contained in it. In Chu Fengmian's hands there were 2 sword principle totem, the 4th and the 19th. There was a huge gap between the 2 sword principle totems. The one in front of him was actually one of the top 3 sword principle totems. The top 3 sword principle totems had long been lost in the 9 regions. It was said that the unparalleled swordsmanship recorded on it was comparable to a legendary immortal technique. The experts looked at the sword principle totem with even more fervor. They could not wait to obtain it. The elder glanced at the crowd and said, "Without further ado, the auction of the sword principle totem begins. The starting price is 1 million great luo pills. 10 million. Just as the old man finished speaking, a powerful cultivator in one of the private rooms immediately raised the price by 10 times. This voice sounded a little old, but the attitude in his words indicated that he was determined to obtain the sword Dao totem. It increased tenfold all of a sudden? That's too exaggerated. Many cultivators originally wanted to join in the fun and make a bid. However, the moment the old man opened his mouth, he raised the price to 10 million. This price already exceeded the number that most martial artists could accept. Old man Sword Bone, it's him? Hearing this old man's voice, Luo Kong immediately recognized this person's identity. Old Sword Bone is an anomaly among Emperor Gu. He doesn't belong to any sect and is considered a rogue cultivator. However, his sword Dao is extremely terrifying. It is said that he uses the sword as his bone. Hence, he is called Old Sword Bone. Luo Kong said, "This old man Sword Bone is extremely petty. He is a vengeful person. If anyone dares to compete with him, he will definitely take revenge on them." "Really? If you want revenge, then come at me," Chu Fengmian said indifferently when he heard Luo Kang's words. Not to mention Emperor Gu, even a heavenly being wouldn't be able to stop Chu Fengmian's determination to obtain the sword Dao totem. 20 million. Chu Fengmian said coldly. "It's him? That brat again? He actually still has wealth?" Hearing Chu Fengmian's voice from the private room, everyone was a little surprised. They originally thought that Chu Fengmian and Rian Gongzi had already spent all their wealth when competing for the Jade Cloud fruit. They didn't expect Chu Fengmian to wait until the end and make a move when the sword Dao totem appeared. This brat is strange. I wonder where he got so much wealth. Could the sword Dao totem have fallen into his hands? It's hard to say. Unlike the Jade Cloud fruit, the sword Dao totem is something that many Emperor Gu desire. It won't be easy for him to buy it. Other than Rian Gongzi, no one else competed with Chu Fengmian for the Jade Cloud fruit because the value of the Jade Cloud fruit wasn't that high. However, the sword Dao totem was different. This kind of sword Dao treasure was something that all sword cultivators in the world dreamed of obtaining. 30 million. Just as Chu Fengmian made his bid, another clear voice rang out. This voice came from the private room beside Chu Fengmian. It was the voice of the Princess of the Sea. 40 million. But soon, another Emperor Gu opened his mouth and made an even higher bid. 50 million. 60 million. 70 million. The price of the sword Dao totem shot up crazily in an instant. Every bid was raised by a total of 10 million. Crazy. They're all crazy. How terrifying. So many ancient emperors, just to fight for a single totem? Many onlookers were dumbfounded. They didn't expect that such a sword Dao totem would be fought over by so many Emperor Gu. However, many experts knew that the value of the sword Dao totem was far more than that. For any sword cultivator, the sword Dao totem was more valuable than any treasure in the world. It was definitely a treasure. Even the supreme sword Qi couldn't be compared to the sword Dao totem. The price continued to rise. In less than 5 minutes, the price of the sword Dao totem was close to 100 million. 100 million. Old Man Sword Bone made another bid. Among the countless competitors, Elder Sword Bone was the most enthusiastic one. This meant that he was determined to obtain the sword Dao totem. However, this didn't mean that the others were inferior. 120 million. Soon, another Emperor Gu opened his mouth and lowered the price of the sword Dao totem. At this price, there was no one else who wanted to join in the fun. Everyone was determined to obtain the sword Dao totem. Although the number of people bidding had decreased, the number of bids was getting more and more exaggerated. 200 million. All of a sudden, the Princess of the Sea opened her mouth again. She raised the price to a whole new level the moment she opened her mouth. 300 million. Another Emperor Gu didn't want to be outdone and made a bid. This Emperor Gu was extremely mysterious. Even Luo Kong couldn't recognize him. However, this mysterious Emperor Gu was extremely enthusiastic every time he made a bid. It showed that he was determined to obtain the sword Dao totem. 400 million. Elder Sword Bone opened his mouth again. However, before he could finish his words, a thunderous voice resounded in the auction hall. Chapter 1343. This voice wasn't loud and there wasn't much emotion in it. It was an extremely calm voice. However, to the people present, it was simply like a sudden clap of thunder that directly exploded in their minds. 1 billion. Just now, Old Man Sword Bone, the mysterious Emperor Gu and the others had raised the price by 100 million each time. This had shocked everyone. 100 million great Luo pills was a concept that many true emperors didn't even dare to think about. But now, a bid of 1 billion had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Seeing that Chu Fengmian hadn't made a bid, everyone thought that Chu Fengmian was planning to give up. Who would have thought that Chu Fengmian would directly bid such a sky-high price? 1 billion was a sky-high price that doubled the price of the sword Dao totem. 1 billion? Did I hear it wrong? Many martialists were in disbelief. How is this possible? How can this person have so much wealth? Who is this person? 1 billion, even Emperor Gu might not be able to take out such a sum. 1 billion great Luo pills was a fortune that many Emperor Gu would have to accumulate. However, Chu Fengmian's tone now seemed to be very relaxed when he called out a bid of 1 billion great Luo pills. Senior brother Yu Luo Kong was dumbfounded when he heard Chu Fengmian's bid. 1 billion great Luo pills was a huge amount of wealth. Luo Kong was considered quite wealthy among the disciples of the sacred dragon's secret domain. However, compared to Chu Fengmian, he was even worse than a pauper. 1 billion great Luo pills, is there anyone who will bid higher? Oh my God, 1 billion great Luo pills, if it's given to me, I can directly dominate a continent and become the ruler of a continent. Many martialists felt that no one dared to continue bidding. Suddenly, another old voice resounded. 2 billion. The person who made the bid was Old Man Sword Bone. There was actually a higher price? Many martialists almost fainted when they heard this price. 2 billion great Luo pills. Just for this sword Dao totem, no one had expected that this sword Dao totem could be sold at such a high price. 3 billion. Not long after, the mysterious Emperor Gu didn't want to be outdone and raised the price again. As for the Princess of the Sea, she had already withdrawn from the competition. He could still take out a few 100 million great overarching pills, but a few billion great overarching pills was beyond the scope of what she could compete for. After all, even though the Princess of the Sea had a noble status, she was only a quasi-emperor and not Emperor Gu. Only the truly important people of Blue Ocean City would be qualified to continue competing. Only Chu Fengmian, the mysterious Emperor Gu, and Elder Sword Bone were left fighting for the sword Dao totem. As the three of them continued to bid, The price of the sword principal totem had reached 5 billion. However, the bidding speed had slowed down and was no longer as extravagant as before. 5 billion great luo pills was a huge sum even for Emperor Gu. No one was willing to fork out another sum of money for no reason. 1 billion. Old Man Sword Bone said. 2 billion. The mysterious Emperor Gu did not dare to show weakness and continued to bid. Upon hearing this, Old Man Sword Bone suddenly stood up and the atmosphere immediately turned cold. Both of you, this sword principal totem is of great use to me. Why don't the two of you give me some face today? We will meet again in the future. Although his words were polite, the underlying meaning was a threat. Old Man Sword Bone had already disregarded the rules of the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce and directly raised his bid. As soon as these words were spoken, the entire place fell silent and only whispers could be heard. Old Man Sword Bone has already threatened them. I wonder if the two of them still want to compete. I don't think they dare to continue bidding. If they continue to bid, they will offend Old Man Sword Bone. Old Man Sword Bone is a narrow-minded person. Wouldn't it be asking for trouble if they make an enemy out of him? It is said that Old Man Sword Bone has already reached the peak of the 7 Calamity Emperor Gu and is preparing to break through to the 8 Calamity Emperor Gu. With such strength, he would be considered a powerhouse in the Daluo star field. Even Emperor Gu has to give Old Man Sword Bone some face. Wouldn't he be courting death if he continues to bid now? Voices continued to discuss this matter. Gentlemen, why don't the two of you take a step back today, and consider this old man owing the two of you a favor? Old Man Sword Bone said after hearing Chu Fengmian and the mysterious Emperor Gu remained silent. All right, Old Man Sword Bone, I will give you this favor today. I won't compete with you anymore. As soon as these words were spoken, the mysterious Emperor Gu took a step back and stopped bidding. Although he could continue to compete with Old Man Sword Bone, this price was already close to the limit of what he could bear. If he continued to compete, even if he obtained the Sword Path Totem, both sides would suffer losses. It would be better to sell a favor to Old Man Sword Bone. Many thanks. Old Man Sword Bone couldn't help but glance in Chu Fengmian's direction when he heard these words. There shouldn't be anyone else who wants to compete, right? I bid 3 billion. After the mysterious Emperor Gu withdrew, Old Man Sword Bone believed that the Sword Path Totem was already his. As for Chu Fengmian, he had never placed him in his eyes. 3 billion going once. The old man on the viewing platform was so shocked by this fight that he was speechless. After a long time, he finally reacted and spoke. Is there no higher bid? 3 billion going twice. The sky-high price of 3 billion great overarching pills was something that only a few people could afford. 3 billion going thrice, 6 billion. Just as Old Man Sword Bone felt that the Sword Path Totem already belonged to him, a voice suddenly rang out. A voice directly shattered his beautiful dream. The person who had bid was Chu Fengmian. Others might be afraid of Old Man Sword Bone's threat, but Chu Fengmian wasn't. No matter what kind of threat it was, Chu Fengmian would not be able to stop it. Today, Chu Fengmian was going to obtain the Sword Path Totem. Courting death. The moment he heard Chu Fengmian's words, Old Man Sword Bone's expression was clearly startled. Then, an astonishing killing intent erupted from his body. The wooden chair he was sitting on was instantly shattered into pieces by the violent spiritual energy. He, the grand Old Man Sword Bone, had already threatened Chu Fengmian earlier. Yet, Chu Fengmian still dared to bid. Evidently, Chu Fengmian did not take his threat seriously. Take back your words and this old man will spare your life. Old Man Sword Bone looked at Chu Fengmian's private room and spoke word by word. Chapter 1344. Is it necessary? Does a Sword Dao statue have to fall out with Emperor Gu? He has offended Elder Sword Bone. Even if he wins the Sword Dao Totem, he will lose his life. Even an expert like Emperor Gu is unwilling to offend Elder Sword Bone. This brat still dares to bid. Looks like he is tired of living. Seeing Chu Fengmian continue to bid, the crowd started to discuss among themselves. Elder Sword Bone looked at Chu Fengmian. Every word he said was filled with killing intent. Brat, I don't have much patience. You want me to take back my words? Old man, you are not qualified to do so. Chu Fengmian snorted in the face of Elder Sword Bone's killing intent. He did not back down. Boom. As soon as these words came out, the whole place went silent. When the crowd heard these words, they almost couldn't breathe. They were all scared to death. Even some of Emperor Gu's eyes were filled with horror. In Skyhorn City, there were only a few people who dared to offend Elder Sword Bone. A super expert who was about to step into the 8 tribulations. Emperor Gu was definitely a big shot in the 4 major forces. Is this brat courting death? Does he want to die by provoking Elder Sword Bone? So unyielding? Could it be that this person has a shocking background? So what if he has a shocking background? Elder Sword Bone is not from any sect. If he wants to kill someone, no one can stop him. Many experts looked at Chu Fengmian's box as if they were looking at a dead man. Provoking Elder Sword Bone was no different from courting death. Senior brother, you are too crazy. Luo Kong, who was sitting at the side, was scared to death when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. He did not expect Chu Fengmian to retaliate against Elder Sword Bone's threat. This was Elder Sword Bone, an expert who had been famous in Daluo Starfield for a long time. He was a super expert who could kill Emperor Gu. So what? I must get this sword Dao Totem. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with killing intent. He was never afraid of any threats. Old man, how much wealth do you have? Take it all out. If you don't have enough, then scram. Don't waste my time here. Chu Fengmian looked at Old Man Sword Bone and said coldly, "Damn it!" Old Sword Bone was immediately enraged when he heard Chu Fengmian calling him an old bastard. A terrifying killing intent burst forth from his body. He unsheathed his sword and pointed it at Chu Fengmian. He wanted to destroy Chu Fengmian. The terrifying sword edge instantly engulfed the entire auction venue. Old Man Sword Bone, please stop. Just as the swords appeared, a golden light suddenly flew out. It was an old man. With a wave of his hand, he dissolved the swords that filled the sky. Fighting is not allowed in the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. If you want to fight, do it outside Skyhorn City. The old man glanced at Old Man Sword Bone and spoke calmly. Who is this person? You dare to speak to Old Man Sword Bone like that? Everyone knew that Old Man Sword Bone was overbearing. He even wanted to kill Chu Fengmian in the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. He was simply a lawless person. Even some Emperor Gu had to be respectful to Old Man Sword Bone and address him as senior. You don't know? This person is the Great Honorable of the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. He is an 8 Calamity Emperor Gu. His strength surpasses Old Man Sword Bone's. A martial artist at the side said. Humph! Old Man Sword Bone snorted coldly when he saw the old man before him. He slowly kept his sword edge. He looked at Chu Fengmian. The killing intent in his eyes did not diminish. Junior, you better not leave Skyhorn City for the rest of your life. The moment you leave Skyhorn City will be the moment you die. After Old Man Sword Bone finished speaking, he turned into a light and left the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. He did not intend to compete with Chu Fengmian anymore. In his opinion, Chu Fengmian was already a dead man. So what if Chu Fengmian obtained the Sword Principal Totem? The moment he killed Chu Fengmian, the Sword Principal Totem would belong to him. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief after Old Man Sword Bone left. Many true emperors trembled in fear when an expert who could enter the 8 Calamity Emperor Gu was enraged. The old man on the spectator's stand stood up and announced that the Sword Principal Totem belonged to Chu Fengmian. Not long after, a lady came into the room with an empty ring. The Sword Principal Totem was stored in the empty ring. After Chu Fengmian confirmed that there was no mistake, he took out 6 billion Saint-grade spirit stones and handed it over to the people of the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. He then stood up and left. Chu Fengmian knew that the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce was not a place to stay for long. Chu Fengmian had exposed a lot of his wealth in the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. He had even offended Old Man Sword Bone and Riflame Young Master. After obtaining the Sword Principal Totem, Chu Fengmian could not wait to find a place to comprehend it. Luo Kong also stood up and left with Chu Fengmian. As soon as they left the room, they saw 2 middle-aged men standing guard outside. The 2 middle-aged men came up to them when they saw them. "Gentlemen, our young master wishes to see the 2 of you." One of the middle-aged men looked at Chu Fengmian and said proudly, "Your young master?" Chu Fengmian's eyes flickered. He could see that the 2 men's clothes were very similar to Riflame Young Master's. It seemed like they were from the Riflame Palace. Riflame Young Master wanted to see him? "Senior brother, be careful. They don't come with good intentions," Luo Kong whispered at the side. Riflame Young Master was a narrow-minded person. This was a well-known fact. Chu Fengmian had just slapped Riflame Young Master's face in the auction. Now that Riflame Young Master wanted to see Chu Fengmian, it was definitely not a good thing. "It's fine. It's just a Riflame Young Master. So be it." Chu Fengmian glanced at the side and sat down on a chair. "However, let him come over himself. I'll wait for him here." "What an arrogant brat!" a middle-aged man said fiercely after hearing Chu Fengmian's words. "Who do you think our young master is? It's your honor to see him. Hurry up and come with me. Come here." The middle-aged man suddenly condensed his spiritual energy and grabbed at Chu Fengmian. His attack was incomparably fierce. He immediately enveloped Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong, wanting to capture them together. The middle-aged man was a 5 tribulation true emperor. Naturally, he did not put Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong in his eyes. Scram! Before Chu Fengmian could make a move, Luo Kong could no longer bear it. He waved his hand and golden light filled the sky. The middle-aged man was sent flying by the golden light and rolled on the ground. Chapter 1345. Inside a private room. A young man sat on the throne in the private room. His eyes were like the scorching sun, as if they could burn the world wherever his gaze landed. This person was the young lord of Riflame Hall, young Master Riflame. Beside him were over a dozen people. They were standing to the side and waiting upon him respectfully. The people around him were at least 5 tribulation true emperors. Some were even 6 tribulation true emperors. They could be considered experts in their own regions. However, before this Riflame Young Master, they were willing to serve him. "Young Master, why aren't those 2 back yet?" A woman looked at young Master Riflame and asked with a fawning tone. "Those 2 trash can't even handle such a small matter for young Master? No hurry." Young Master Riflame sat on the throne with an incomparably calm expression. "Wait here. Young Master." At this moment, the door of the private room opened and 2 middle-aged men walked in. "Did you bring them here?" Young Master Riflame looked over and asked coldly. "Reporting to young Master, we are incompetent and have let you down." The 2 middle-aged men hurriedly knelt down and said with a terrified expression, "2 trash can't even handle such a small matter? How are you qualified to serve young Master?" The woman who spoke earlier said coldly with a dark expression, "Tell me what happened." Young Master Riflame's body moved slightly as he looked at the 2 and said, "It's like this. We went to call those 2 over. However, not only did those 2 refuse to comply, they instead injured us." The middle-aged man knelt on the ground and said while trembling, "They also told us that if we want to meet them, young Master has to go there personally." The moment these words came out, presumptuous! Those 2 brats actually dared to speak to young Master like that. The few cultivators standing beside young Master Riflame had a change in expression as they spoke coldly. Did those 2 people really say that?" Young Master Riflame's expression turned unfriendly as killing intent appeared in his eyes. Absolutely, the middle-aged man hurriedly said. Young Master, those two are simply courting death. They are lawless. I'll go and subdue them right now and bring them to you. I'll make them apologize. A Sixth Tribulation True Emperor stepped forward and said, There's no need for you to do that. Let me go and see who it is that dares to speak so arrogantly. Riflame Young Master stood up from his throne. The throne that he was sitting on had cracks all over it. Let's go, take me there. Didn't they want me to meet them personally? Let's go take a look. Murderous intent flashed in the eyes of the Riflame Prince. He then walked out of the room. Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong were sitting in chairs in the Shifeng Chamber of Commerce, chatting with each other. Suddenly, a scorching hot aura swept over, causing Chu Fengmian to look over. A young man walked over from afar. The scorching aura was emitted from his body. It was that flaming young master. He walked over with 10 odd cultivators behind him. All of them had hostile gazes. Flaming young master? Chu Fengmian glanced at flaming young master and said, Brat, since you know my young master's identity, how dare you ask him to meet you personally? The woman standing beside flaming young master stared at Chu Fengmian and said coldly, Now that you've seen my young master, quickly kneel down and apologize. Scram! Where did this dog come from? You have no right to bark here. Chu Fengmian raised his eyebrows and said rudely. Chu Fengmian didn't even put flaming young master in his eyes, let alone a mere subordinate like him. A Sixth Tribulation True Emperor might be an important figure in the outside world, but for Chu Fengmian, such an ordinary Sixth Tribulation True Emperor was someone he could kill whenever he wanted. Brat, are you courting death? The woman was instantly enraged after hearing Chu Fengmian's words. A terrifying spiritual energy swept towards Chu Fengmian. The moment this spiritual energy approached Chu Fengmian, Luo Kong suddenly took action. Another ray of golden light appeared and instantly scattered the woman's spiritual energy, forcing her figure to retreat. What? Seeing this scene, the expressions of the few cultivators standing behind young Master Rian changed. This woman was a Sixth Tribulation True Emperor, while Luo Kong was only a 3 Tribulation True Emperor. Now that Luo Kong had taken action, he easily dispelled the woman's attack. Such strength was definitely not from a disciple of an ordinary power. The few martial artists immediately took a step forward and surrounded Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong. What's wrong? Did Flaming Young Master come here today to fight? In that case, there's no need to go through so much trouble. All of you can come at me together. I alone am enough. Chu Fengmian swept his gaze across the crowd and said disdainfully. Their disdainful gazes infuriated the martialists. Courting death. A few martial artists even gathered their spiritual energy. They couldn't hold it in any longer and directly unleashed their spiritual energy. All of you back off. At this moment, Flaming Young Master spoke. The martial artists immediately retreated when they heard Flaming Young Master's order. What business do you have with me? Chu Fengmian looked at Flaming Young Master and sat back on the chair with a leisurely look on his face. Flaming Young Master's eyes instantly turned gloomy and revealed some killing intent. With his status, even Emperor Gu had to be polite to him. However, Chu Fengmian was only an immortal realm martial artist. In his eyes, Chu Fengmian wasn't even an ant. Yet, he dared to speak to him in such a manner. However, this killing intent only flashed across Flaming Young Master's face. There wasn't any anger on his face. Nothing. I just want to make a deal with you. Flaming Young Master said calmly. I want to buy the sword Dao Totem in your hand. Oh! Upon hearing this, Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with surprise. He didn't expect Flaming Young Master to be here for the sword Dao Totem. Previously, Flaming Young Master didn't seem to have any intention of competing for the sword Dao Totem. Instead, it was the Princess of the Sea who had the intention of competing for the sword Dao Totem. Recalling Flaming Young Master's previous actions of wooing the Princess of the Sea, Chu Fengmian immediately understood that Flaming Young Master wanted the sword Dao Totem mostly because of the Princess of the Sea. How much are you offering? Chu Fengmian looked at Flaming Young Master playfully and asked. This made Luo Kong, who was beside him, a little surprised. Previously, Chu Fengmian had even dared to offend Elder Sword Bone for the sword Dao Totem. Now, he was actually planning to sell it to Flaming Young Master? However, when Luo Kong saw the playful smile on Chu Fengmian's face, he understood that Chu Fengmian wasn't really planning to sell the sword Dao Totem. 1 billion. 1 billion great Luo pills. I'll buy the sword Dao Totem. Chapter 1346. 1 billion. Chu Fengmian squinted his eyes. I spent 6 billion great Luo elixirs to buy this sword principal totem. Are you going to buy it with 1 billion? That's right. If you know what's good for you and sell the sword principal totem to me, I can let you leave Sky Horn City alive. Riflame Young Master looked at Chu Fengmian and said proudly. You have offended Old Sword Bone. With the sword principal totem in your hands, you will never be able to leave Sky Horn City. If you know what's good for you and sell the sword principal totem to me, I can let you leave Sky Horn City. Taking advantage of the situation, Riflame Young Master's idea was to take advantage of Old Sword Bone's threat to buy the sword principal totem from Chu Fengmian. Although he had made a promise, once the sword principal totem was in his hands, he could just ignore the promise. Brat, have you thought it through? You will be courting death if you keep the sword principal totem. Why don't you sell it to me? You might still have a chance to live. Riflame Young Master saw that Chu Fengmian did not speak and thought that he was hesitating. Ha 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 ha! Chu Fengmian suddenly burst into laughter. He looked at Riflame Young Master as though he had heard a funny joke. What are you laughing at? Riflame Young Master frowned. I'm laughing at you for overestimating yourself. Who do you think you are? 1 billion? Even if you offer me 10 times the price, I won't sell it to you. Chu Fengmian laughed as he spoke. Is there anything else? If there's nothing else, get lost. You. Young Master, let us kill this man. If we don't kill this man, our Riflame Hall will not take this lying down. The cultivators beside Riflame Young Master were shocked and furious as they shouted. As for Riflame Young Master, his face alternated between red and white. He only calmed down after a long time. Good. Very good. Riflame Young Master laughed in anger. Let's go. After saying that, Riflame Young Master turned around and left. The few cultivators beside him gave Chu Fengmian a fierce glare before leaving with Riflame Young Master. Young Master, are we going to let him go just like that? The few cultivators left with Young Master, their faces were still filled with anger. This man purposely went against Young Master. He must be punished. Kill. We must kill him. Not only do we have to kill him, we have to torture him to death. The words of these martial artists were each more vicious than the last. Don't act rashly. That person is already a dead man. Old Sword Bone will not let him off. A scheming look flashed in Riflame Young Master's eyes. However, I heard that the Princess of the Sea is very fond of this sword totem. I must obtain it so that I can give it to her. I've already asked a few elders to come to the Heavenly Horn City. We'll kill this kid and that Old Sword Bone and claim the sword totem. As he spoke, a jade talisman in Young Master Riflame's hand suddenly lit up. They're here. Let's go over. As he spoke, Rian Young Master and his group left the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. On the other side, Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong had already left the Stone Peak Merchant Association and were strolling around Sky Horn City. As soon as they left the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce, Chu Fengmian clearly sensed that he and Luo Kong were being watched. A killing intent shrouded Chu Fengmian's body. This killing intent was not concealed at all. There was no need to guess who it was. It was Old Sword Bone. Old Sword Bone had been waiting outside for Chu Fengmian ever since they left the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. He had been following Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong. Old Sword Bone did not dare to attack Chu Fengmian in the Heavenly Horn City. However, as soon as Chu Fengmian left the Heavenly Horn City, Old Sword Bone would immediately attack and kill Chu Fengmian. Senior brother, what should we do? Should we inform Third Senior Sister? Third Senior Sister is now in the Immortal Burial Continent. She can rush over. Luo Kong could also sense that Old Sword Bone was watching him and Chu Fengmian along the way. Now that Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong had joined forces to deal with Old Sword Bone, they had no chance of winning. If it was an ordinary 7 Calamity Emperor Gu, the two of them might be able to contend against him. However, Old Sword Bone was different. He was someone who was close to becoming an 8 Calamity Emperor Gu. He was several times stronger than an ordinary 7 Calamity Emperor Gu. However, if Qing Meng came, she could easily deal with Old Sword Bone. Not for now. I have my own ways to deal with him. Chu Fengmian shook his head and said slowly. Let's go. I need to find a place to comprehend the Sword Principle Totem. The Sky Horn City was extremely safe. Even a lawless person like Old Sword Bone would not dare to take action in the Sky Horn City. Chu Fengmian intended to comprehend the Sword Principle Totem before leaving the Sky Horn City. Alright. Let's go to the Heaven and Earth Tower. The cave abode there is the best for cultivation. Luo Kong nodded and brought Chu Fengmian to a tea house. Every room in the tea house was an individual cave abode. I need to comprehend the Sword Principle Totem for 2 to 3 days. Junior brother, if you are free, you can buy some corpse blood grass. Chu Fengmian suddenly said to Luo Kong when they entered the cave abode. Corpse blood grass? Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, Luo Kong was a bit startled. The corpse blood grass was not a saint medicine, nor was it a spirit medicine. It was an extremely peculiar plant that could only be born in a place of great danger and condensed blood qi. It had a dense smell of blood. Generally speaking, only Demon Dao martial artists needed corpse blood grass. However, Luo Kong did not ask Chu Fengmian for details. Although corpse blood grass was not rare, it was not difficult to buy it in the Sky Horn City. Then, I will go now, Luo Kong said. All right. Chu Fengmian nodded. After Luo Kong left, Chu Fengmian closed the door of the cave abode and specially set up a few more restriction arrays. After making sure that it was safe, Chu Fengmian took out the Sword Principle Totem from the empty ring. This Sword Principle Totem was taller than a person. Although it was extremely ancient and had experienced countless years, there were still no traces on it. Chu Fengmian did not know what the wood used to make the Sword Principle Totem was, but it was extremely sturdy and could last for thousands of years. However, Chu Fengmian was more concerned about the runes on the Sword Principle Totem. Behind these ancient runes, there was an extremely mysterious sword principle. Let's comprehend it first. Chu Fengmian circulated his spiritual power, and his spiritual consciousness immediately integrated into the Sword Principle Totem. If this Sword Principle Totem was given to a martial artist who was not a sword cultivator, it was almost useless. However, in the hands of a sword cultivator like Chu Fengmian, it was a supreme treasure. Chapter 1347. These sword techniques were extremely ancient and each of them contained incomparably powerful power. Even Chu Fengmian had never seen many of them before. After seeing so many sword techniques, Chu Fengmian frowned. In Chu Fengmian's body, the ancient books that were transformed from the 9 regions sword technique began to cheer. Chu Fengmian's 9 regions sword technique had not been upgraded for a long time. Now that he saw so many sword techniques, he was naturally very excited. Integrate them all. In Chu Fengmian's mind, he was looking at the swordsmanship. These obscure and ancient swordsmanship were instantly mastered by Chu Fengmian. With his sword principle at the peak of the divine sword realm, learning these sword techniques was almost a matter of a snap of his fingers. All the sword techniques in the world originated from the same source. For example, many sword principal grandmasters could learn many sword techniques the first time they saw them. Chu Fengmian's sword principle was the best in all heavens. Chu Fengmian instantly learned these sword techniques. Then, the sword techniques were immediately integrated into the 9 regions sword technique by Chu Fengmian. The 9 regions sword technique took the advantage of the myriad sword technique. When these sword techniques were integrated into the 9 regions sword technique, it was enough to improve the power of the 9 regions sword technique. A total of 400. Chu Fengmian counted carefully. Exactly how many sword techniques were integrated into the 9 regions sword technique? There were 400 sword techniques recorded in this sword principle totem. These 400 sword techniques varied in strength, but they were all incomparably ancient sword technique. Many of the sword techniques in this era could be seen. They were all derived from these ancient sword techniques. After integrating these 400 sword techniques, the power of the 9 regions sword technique was probably several times stronger than before. Chu Fengmian's 9 regions sword technique could integrate the strengths of all the sword techniques in the world. It could be said that Chu Fengmian's 9 regions sword technique could continuously integrate other sword technique. In the future, the 9 regions sword technique could even become the #1 sword technique in all heavens. However, it was easier said than done to obtain all the sword techniques in the world. All the sword techniques in the world originated from sword principle totems. Out of the 19 sword principle totems, Chu Fengmian had only obtained 3 of them. He was still far from obtaining all 19 sword Dao totems. However, obtaining a sword Dao totem was enough to make Chu Fengmian's 9-domain sword technique even more powerful. Furthermore, this wasn't the greatest benefit for Chu Fengmian. The greatest benefit to Chu Fengmian, and also the reason why Chu Fengmian was so eager to obtain the sword Dao totem, was not the swordsmanship recorded in it. Instead, it was the incomplete swordsmanship recorded in the sword principle totems. Previously, Chu Fengmian had comprehended a part of the sword Dao origin from this incomplete sword technique, allowing his sword Dao to reach the peak of the sword god realm. Now, in the 3rd sword principle totem, Chu Fengmian also sensed the incomplete swordsmanship. Moreover, this part of the incomplete sword principle was the same as the incomplete sword principle recorded in the 4th sword principle totem that Chu Fengmian had obtained previously. Chu Fengmian immediately became excited. This incomplete swordsmanship was not the sword principle origin, but it was the swordsmanship closest to the sword principle origin. At least before this, Chu Fengmian had never imagined that an incomplete swordsmanship would be enough to make his sword Dao progress further. These 2 parts can actually be combined? Chu Fengmian comprehended the incomplete swordsmanship bit by bit from the sword principle totem. This incomplete swordsmanship was much more obscure than the swordsmanship recorded in the sword principle totem. Perhaps even a sword cultivator in the sword god realm would find it difficult to comprehend it. Chu Fengmian had already reached the peak of the sword god realm, so he could barely comprehend it. It wasn't the first time that Chu Fengmian had comprehended this incomplete swordsmanship, so he was much more familiar with it. Soon, this incomplete swordsmanship was completely comprehended by Chu Fengmian and appeared in Chu Fengmian's mind. Chu Fengmian observed carefully and found that this incomplete swordsmanship was indeed a part of the incomplete swordsmanship that he had comprehended from the 4th sword principle totem. Chu Fengmian pieced the 2 parts together to form the complete passage. Sword principle origin. The complete section of this incomplete swordsmanship must be the sword principle origin. Chu Fengmian's eyes flickered. Although this was only a part of it, it was more profound than the sword principle that Chu Fengmian had comprehended. Chu Fengmian's sword principle had already reached the peak of the sword god realm. The next step would be to enter the sword principle origin. A sword cultivator who had reached the sword principle origin had never appeared in history. Now, Chu Fengmian was definitely the closest to the sword principle origin. Boom! terrifying sword essence suddenly burst out from Chu Fengmian's body. His body was shrouded in this sword essence. This sword essence seemed to be washing Chu Fengmian's body. It made Chu Fengmian's body look like the incarnation of the sword principle in the world. Sword qi condensed around Chu Fengmian. Every sword qi turned into Chu Fengmian's appearance. It was as if every sword qi was Chu Fengmian's body turning into a sword. Chu Fengmian's sword principle had improved again and was about to reach a higher level. His sword principle had surpassed the ancient times and reached an incomparably terrifying level. Even the power in his body began to rise along with the changes in the sword intent. Boom! The power in Chu Fengmian's body suddenly condensed to the extreme, and at this moment, it suddenly burst out. His realm stepped into the quasi-emperor realm in an instant. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's body was also undergoing earth-shaking changes. Chu Fengmian's sword principle origin was the sword principle. The improvement of sword principle meant that Chu Fengmian's overall strength had increased. I've broken through the quasi-emperor realm just like that. Chu Fengmian suddenly opened his eyes. He didn't expect that obtaining the sword principle totem would bring him such great benefit. Originally, Chu Fengmian was still a certain distance away from the quasi-emperor realm. He didn't expect that this sword principle totem would perfectly make up for all of this, allowing Chu Fengmian to directly step into the quasi-emperor realm. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's sword principle had changed even more. His sword principle origin was one step closer to the sword principle origin. His current strength was several times stronger than before. After stepping into the quasi-emperor realm, I can even fight against Emperor Gu. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with a bit of fighting spirit. His spiritual consciousness looked outside the Heaven and Earth Tower. Outside the Heaven and Earth Tower, Old Man Swordbone was still staring at Chu Fengmian. Obviously, he had no intention of letting Chu Fengmian go. Chapter 1348. It's a pity that this incomplete sword technique is too little. Chu Fengmian felt the power in his body and looked at the sword principle totem, and said regretfully. Chu Fengmian had only obtained a small part of the incomplete sword technique in the sword principle totem, but it was already so beneficial to him. If he could obtain the entire incomplete sword technique, Chu Fengmian's strength would definitely reach an unimaginable level. However, these incomplete sword techniques were only recorded in the sword principle totem. The sword principle totem was a treasure of the sword principle, and it was extremely difficult to obtain even one of them. Chu Fengmian could be said to be lucky to obtain this sword principle totem. Moreover, it was auctioned in the Stone Peak Chamber of Commerce. If this sword principle totem fell into the hands of some major forces, such as the Sacred Dragon's secret domain, they would definitely not sell it. After all, this kind of treasure was something that could only be obtained by chance. However, since the first sword principle totem had flowed into the extraterritorial starry sky, there should be a second and third one. Chu Fengmian searched carefully. It was not difficult to obtain information about the sword principle totem. He would go and take a look when the time came. I've been delayed for another 2 days. It's time to set off. Chu Fengmian slowly opened the cave dwelling and walked out. Originally, Chu Fengmian had planned to go to the immortal burial continent to gain experience and break through to the quasi-emperor realm. However, he did not expect to obtain the sword principle totem in the Sky Corner City, which gave him a great opportunity to step into the quasi-emperor realm. However, Chu Fengmian still planned to make a trip to the immortal burial continent. Chu Fengmian's strength had increased, and the chances of him obtaining treasures in the immortal burial continent would be greater. Previously, Chu Fengmian only had the ability to contend against Emperor Gu. He did not even have the confidence to escape from Emperor Gu's hands. Now that Chu Fengmian had stepped into the quasi-emperor realm, he was truly confident that he could face off against Emperor Gu. Senior brother, you've come out of seclusion? Chu Fengmian had just left the cave dwelling when he saw Luokong. How's the result? When Luo Kong saw Chu Fengmian's strength, his throat seemed to be blocked by something. His mouth was wide open, but he could not make a sound. After a long while, Luo Kong reacted. Senior brother, you've broken through? When Luo Kong spoke, his voice was filled with disbelief. Although Chu Fengmian's strength, he could sense that Chu Fengmian was still some distance away from a breakthrough. Who would have thought that Chu Fengmian would step into the quasi-emperor realm in just 2 days of seclusion? This kind of speed was simply shocking, surpassing his imagination. Not bad, eyes right, I've stepped into the quasi-emperor realm. Chu Fengmian looked at the shocked Luo Kong and smiled. At the same time, he released his power. In an instant, this aura was covered. Aura was Luo's. The moment he was enveloped by this aura, Luo Kang's expression became incomparably horrified. Beads of sweat continuously dripped down from his forehead. In a moment Luo's Chu Long Chu's Chu of God Totem Marshal, he, Emperor of Chu. The moment Chu Fengmian's aura shrouded him, Luo Kong felt as if Emperor Gu was standing in front of him with all his strength. This kind of power was a kind of power that he could not resist. It was as if he could not even fight back in front of this aura. This was definitely the kind of power that only Emperor Gu could bring to him. Even the many Emperor Gu that Luo Kong had faced in the past were not as terrifying as Chu Fengmian's. Senior brother, what level have you reached with your current strength? Luo Kong looked at Chu Fengmian for a long time before he spoke. He could not imagine what level Chu Fengmian's strength had reached. At least, if he were to fight with Chu Fengmian now, he was afraid that he would be killed in an instant. Unsurprisingly, his strength was not qualified to compete with Chu Fengmian. I should be able to fight Emperor Gu, but after all, I have not fought with Emperor Gu before. However, it should not be a problem for me to escape unscathed. Chu Fengmian said calmly. After all, he had not fought with Emperor Gu before. Naturally, he could not be sure if he had the ability to fight against Emperor Gu. However, Chu Fengmian was confident that he could protect himself and escape unscathed from Emperor Gu. Fight with Emperor Gu. Luo Kong was completely speechless. Chu Fengmian had just become a quasi-emperor, but he was already strong enough to fight against Emperor Gu. He was also known as a rare genius in the Sacred Dragon secret realm. As a 3-tribulation true emperor, defeating a 6-tribulation true emperor was already something to be proud of. However, compared to Chu Fengmian, he was nothing. How terrifying! If third senior sister knew of your current strength, she would be shocked to death. Senior brother's future achievements will be comparable to first senior brother's. Luo Kong looked at Chu Fengmian and murmured to himself. At least among all the people he knew, only the legendary first senior brother of the Holy Dragon sect, Yun Zun, could be on equal footing with Chu Fengmian. As for the others, Qing Meng and the others were far inferior to Chu Fengmian. With your current strength, senior brother is qualified to become a chosen prince when you return to the Sacred Dragon secret realm. Luo Kong looked at Chu Fengmian and said enviously, "Oh? Become a chosen prince?" Chu Fengmian said with some surprise. Chu Fengmian did not care about becoming a chosen prince. He was still an outer disciple in the Sacred Dragon secret realm and did not have the chance to become a chosen prince. This status did not matter to him. Moreover, the Holy Dragon sect had an extraordinary status in the Sacred Dragon secret realm. This made Chu Fengmian even less interested in such a status. Senior brother, you don't care about the status of a chosen prince? Luo Kong asked with a smile after seeing Chu Fengmian's reaction. A chosen prince of the Sacred Dragon secret realm is different from a core disciple or a true disciple. Although a chosen prince is a disciple, he is actually the successor of the next sect master. For example, the position of the sect master of the 4 sects is inherited by a chosen prince. After becoming a chosen prince, one's status in the Sacred Dragon secret realm will surpass that of an elder and be on equal footing with a supreme elder. Furthermore, one can go to the sacred ground to cultivate. Oh right, senior brother, didn't you plan to meet Han Yueli and Luoshi? The two of them are in the sacred ground. If senior brother becomes a chosen prince, you can go to the sacred ground directly to look for them. Originally, Chu Fengmian didn't have much interest in Luo Kang's promotion to Holy Son. Chapter 1349. Previously, he heard from Luo Kang that although Han Yueli and Luo Shi were in the sacred dragon's secret realm, they were in a sacred ground. Therefore, he had not seen the two of them until now. If Chu Fengmian became a chosen, he could go to the sacred ground to look for them. When I return to the sacred dragon's secret realm, I will become a chosen. Chu Fengmian said. There was no rush to become a chosen. Chu Fengmian would wait until he returned to the sacred dragon's secret realm. Now that he was in the Sky Horn City, he naturally had to make a trip to the immortal burial continent. Let's go out of the city. Chu Fengmian looked at Luo Kang and suddenly said, Out of the city? Luo Kang's expression changed and he said nervously, Don't we need to inform third senior sister? Previously, when Luo Kang was strolling in the Sky Horn City, he felt that Old Sword Bone was still following him. If he were to leave the city now, he would definitely be hunted down by Old Sword Bone. Although Chu Fengmian was much stronger now, he was at most comparable to Emperor Gu. However, Old Sword Bone was not an ordinary quasi-emperor. He was an expert who could break through to the level of 8 Tribulation Emperor Gu at any time. Ordinary Emperor Gu would not be able to withstand more than a few moves from Old Sword Bone. Now that Chu Fengmian wanted to leave the city, Luo Kang's expression became nervous. No need. Chu Fengmian shook his head and turned to look at Luo Kang. Did you buy corpse blood grass? Yes, I bought 2. One of them is about 100 years old and the other is over 1,000 years old. Luo Kang took out 2 stalks of corpse blood grass from his empty ring. The corpse blood grass looked no different from the weeds by the roadside. However, it emitted a pungent smell of blood. The moment Luo Kang took it out, he could not help but hold his breath. Obviously, it did not smell good. 2 stalks are enough. I have a way to deal with Old Sword Bone. Chu Fengmian took the 2 stalks of corpse blood grass and put them into his empty ring. Let's go. After saying that, Chu Fengmian walked out of the Sky Horn City. Seeing how confident Chu Fengmian was, Luo Kang thought for a moment, then followed suit. He also understood that Chu Fengmian was not the kind of person who would take risk. Since Chu Fengmian dared to go out, he naturally had a way to deal with Old Man Sword Bone. The two of them walked out of Sky Horn City. At the same time, Old Man Sword Bone was following them not far away. When he saw Chu Fengmian and Old Man Sword Bone preparing to leave, he sneered. Within the Sky Horn City, Old Man Sword Bone did not dare to attack Chu Fengmian and Chu Feng. However, once they left the Sky Horn City, he would no longer have any misgivings. Even though Chu Fengmian and Luo Kang seemed to have some background, he still did not care. Old Sword Bone had always been a lone wolf. It was said that there were many demonic beasts that were raised by the heavenly beings in the celestial burial continent. Many of these demonic beasts were stronger than Emperor Gu. There were even some poisons left behind by the heavenly beings that could easily poison the 9 Tribulations Emperor Gu to death. Even Emperor Gu had to be careful when he set foot in the celestial burial continent. Now, Chu Fengmian actually wanted to rush in directly. I know a safe route. Don't worry, we can just rush in directly. A topographic map suddenly appeared in Chu Fengmian's mind. This was the map that the warrior gave Chu Fengmian when he bought the purple veins. The route that Chu Fengmian was about to take was according to the map. Naturally, there was no danger along the way. You want to enter the celestial burial continent? Not far away, Elder Sword Bone, who was chasing after Chu Fengmian and Luo Kang, also saw through Chu Fengmian's actions. Humph, do you think that you can escape after entering the celestial burial continent? You two brats, let's see where you can escape to. Elder Sword Bone was also aware of the threat of the celestial burial continent. However, he was not afraid. He followed Chu Fengmian all the way. It was equivalent to Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong helping him to detect the danger while he slowly followed behind. After entering the celestial burial continent, it would not be easy for Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong to escape. Thinking of this, Elder Sword Bone slowed down. Chapter 1350. Senior Brother, Old Sword Bone's flying light has slowed down. Luo Kong, who was in Chu Fengmian's flying light, had been paying attention to Old Sword Bone's every move. When he saw that Old Sword Bone's flying light had slowed down, his face lit up with joy. Should we shake him off now? Of course not. This old man has been targeting us for a few days. It would be too easy for him to just let him off. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with ruthlessness. I want him to be buried here today. Old Sword Bone's enmity had already been formed. Today they would shake off Old Sword Bone. In the future they might encounter Old Sword Bone again. If Old Sword Bone was not eliminated, he would always be a scourge. Chu Fengmian did not intend to let such a threat appear at any time. What? Senior Brother, you want to kill Old Sword Bone? Luo Kong was startled when he heard this. He thought that Chu Fengmian was just planning to shake off Old Sword Bone and let the two of them be temporarily safe. He did not expect Chu Fengmian to have such a big appetite. He directly planned to kill Old Sword Bone. Old Sword Bone's temper was so irritable that he naturally had many enemies. However, the fact that he could stand here peacefully was a symbol of his strength. There was once an 8 Tribulation Emperor Gu who chased after Old Sword Bone, but Old Sword Bone escaped unscathed. Only the 9 Tribulation Emperor Gu, a legendary figure, could kill him. Even if I don't kill him, I will make him lose a few layers of skin today. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with ruthlessness as he said, "Hold your breath and suppress your blood qi to the lowest level." All right. Luo Kong nodded and immediately held his breath and suppressed his blood qi to the lowest level. The immortal burial continent was already very close. In an instant, Chu Fengmian had already reached the periphery of the immortal burial continent. At a glance, there were many unique scenes in the immortal burial continent. There were many valleys, shattered seas, burned plains, and even some places were full of poisonous miasma. The immortal burial continent had experienced countless battles between heavenly beings. It was already full of holes. The current appearance was caused by the bombardment of those heavenly beings. Without a map, martial artists who came to the immortal burial continent for the first time would have to carefully consider where to land. After all, it seemed that no matter where one went, it was a place filled with endless danger. One could even clearly feel that there were countless martial artists and demon gods fighting in the immortal burial continent. Chu Fengmian followed the map and found the mountain valley where he obtained the purple veins. Soon after, he brought Luo Kong and descended. There were dangers everywhere in the immortal burial continent. There were many demonic beasts and ferocious beasts wreaking havoc. Chu Fengmian also observed for a while before descending. Chu Fengmian descended and withdrew his blood qi. Then, he led Luo Kong into the valley. You want to hide in the immortal burial continent? Today, no matter where you hide, you will die. Old man Jian Gu in the sky revealed a furious expression when he saw Chu Fengmian descend. Murderous intent surged as he also descended. Boom! A terrifying spiritual energy suddenly erupted. Many martial artists and demon gods in the vicinity hurriedly avoided it. They knew that an expert had descended into the immortal burial continent. Old man Jian Gu stepped into the valley and discovered Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong. His eyes immediately turned cold and his murderous intent shrouded them. Kid, hand over your life. Without further ado, old man Jian Gu moved his palm and a spiritual sword condensed. He slashed the sword at Chu Fengmian. This sword contained an incomparably sharp sword radiance and old man Jian Gu's anger. He had been following Chu Fengmian and Luokong since the Sky Horn City for a long time. He was waiting for this moment. At the same time, old man Jian Gu's angry voice was heard as the sword was unsheathed. Die! Old man, the one who will die today is you. Chu Fengmian sneered and said to Luokong beside him. Step back. At the same time, he took a step forward and moved his palm. Suddenly, a stalk of corpse blood grass appeared in his palm. This stalk of corpse blood grass was crushed by Chu Fengmian's palm. Immediately, the entire valley was enveloped by a rotten smell of blood. Corpse blood grass? Kid, what tricks do you want to play? It's useless today. Old man Jian Gu said disdainfully when he saw Chu Fengmian's action. Although the corpse blood grass was poisonous, it was nothing to Emperor Gu. His sword moved and instantly, the bloody smell that filled the sky was cleared. However, at this moment, a roar suddenly resounded. This roar was like a dragon's roar. However, it was more violent than a dragon's roar. Then, a huge figure that was 100 feet tall flew out from the ground of the valley. Sure enough, the records are correct. Where the Xianhuang grass grows, there will definitely be a Yin blood dragon, Chu Fengmian said with a smile when he saw the figure appear. An adult Yin blood dragon is enough for this old man to deal with. Chu Fengmian was surprised when he saw the young man obtain the purple veins. This was because any ancient sacred medicine that grew in a place like the immortal burial continent would definitely be guarded by a strange beast. With the young man's strength, he was not qualified to deal with the guardian strange beast. Therefore, Chu Fengmian guessed at that time, this guardian strange beast should be in a deep sleep and guarding the Xianhuang grass. Therefore, it gave the young man an opportunity to take advantage of. The Yin blood dragon loved the smell of blood. Although the Xianhuang grass was not a spiritual medicine with the smell of blood, once it withered, it would turn into an extremely pure smell of blood and burst out. Therefore, the Yin blood dragon should have been in a deep sleep underground to guard the Xianhuang grass. As for the purple veins, they were useless to him. Therefore, he did not care about them. Now, the corpse blood grass was enough to burst out with a great amount of smell of blood. It was enough to awaken the Yin blood dragon. The Yin blood dragon loved the smell of blood. The smell of blood on old man Jian Gu's body naturally surpassed that of Chu Fengmian and Luokong. Therefore, the moment it came out, it rushed towards old man Jian Gu. An adult Yin blood dragon's strength was comparable to Emperor Gu's. Chu Fengmian alone could not deal with old man Jian Gu. However, with the Yin blood dragon, it might not necessarily be the case. Roar! When the Yin blood dragon woke up, it immediately saw old man Jian Gu. It was incomparably furious. It opened its mouth and rushed towards old man Jian Gu. It wanted to devour all of the smell of blood on old man Jian Gu. Chapter 1351. The moment Elder Sword Bone saw the Yin blood dragon, he knew that he had been tricked by Chu Fengmian. Although he did not know how Chu Fengmian knew that there would be a Yin blood dragon in the valley, the Yin blood dragon had its eyes on him and had no intention of letting him go. The Yin blood dragon was greatly attracted by the blood chi of the 8th Tribulation Emperor Gu. If Elder Sword Bone wanted to retreat, he would be able to escape unscathed. However, he had no intention of retreating. This time, he had finally caught Chu Fengmian and Luokong. If he retreated now, Chu Fengmian would enter the immortal burial continent. The immortal burial continent was so big that even if he wanted to find a person, it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Of course, he would not let go of this opportunity. Brat, do you think you can be saved just because you have a beast like this? I will kill this beast first and then kill you. Elder Sword Bone stared at Chu Fengmian and shouted angrily. Then, the sword in his hand flashed and sword light filled the sky as it slashed the Yin blood dragon's body. The Yin blood dragon seemed to have heard Elder Sword Bone's words. It was infuriated and its ferocity increased. Streaks of sword chi hit the Yin blood dragon's body, but they could not even break the scales on its body. At the same time, The Blood Dragon roared and attacked Elder Sword Bone. The scene became even more chaotic. Senior brother, how did you know that the Blood Dragon would be in the valley? Luo Kong was somewhat stunned when he saw that Old Sword Bone and the Blood Dragon were already fighting in the air. If he hadn't been with Chu Fengmian all this time, he would have suspected that Chu Fengmian had come to the Immortal Burial Continent. He actually knew the location of the Blood Dragon in advance, and even used the corpse bloodgrass to wake it up. However, the Blood Dragon should not be a match for Elder Sword Bone. Senior brother, what should we do? Luo Kong was paying attention to the battle between Elder Sword Bone and the Blood Dragon. Although he was not qualified to intervene with his strength, he could see that. Now, the Blood Dragon had begun to fall into a disadvantage. After all, Elder Sword Bone was a terrifying existence close to the 8th Tribulation Emperor Gu. He was really angry and sword chi hit the Blood Dragon's body. There were many wounds on the Blood Dragon's body. It seemed that the Blood Dragon was already covered in wounds. It doesn't matter. I didn't expect this Blood Flood Dragon to be able to kill this old man. I just wanted to borrow his strength to exhaust his strength. Chu Fengmian sneered and took out another stalk of corpse bloodgrass from his hand. Now I can give this old man some more trouble. As Chu Fengmian spoke, he immediately threw the corpse bloodgrass out. When it neared the Blood Dragon, it suddenly exploded. 1,000 corpse blood Fengmian's body. 1,000 bloodgrass was corpse was grass was grass was a top-grade herb. The Blood Dragon was wrapped in blood Fengmian's body. It suddenly roared and opened its mouth. The blood Fengmian's body was devoured by it. After swallowing the corpse bloodgrass, the Inshua Flood Dragon seemed to have received an infusion of power. Its power suddenly increased by several times, and its ferocity was greatly enhanced. Even the injuries on its body had recovered by quite a bit. Little bastard! This sudden change almost angered Old Man Sword Bone to death. He had already used a lot of his power to suppress the Blood Dragon's power. As long as he put in more effort, it would be enough to kill the Blood Dragon. Then, it would be time for him to kill Chu Fengmian. However, with the corpse bloodgrass, the Blood Dragon's power suddenly recovered a lot. He knew that Chu Fengmian was behind all this. Kill! Elder Sword Bone was burning with anger. He ignored the Blood Dragon and slashed at Chu Fengmian with a shocking sword light. His hatred for Chu Fengmian was so deep that it seeped into his bones. Even if he was injured by the Blood Dragon, he would kill Chu Fengmian first. Senior brother, be careful. When Luo Kong saw Old Man Sword Bone suddenly attack, he was startled. Immediately, 5 rays of multicolored light appeared behind him and attacked the sword beam. First form. Chu Fengmian's expression was cold. Suddenly, he clenched his 5 fingers and turned them into a dragon claw and attacked. At the same time, Chu Fengmian activated the Battle Dragon bloodline in his body and the power of Primogenitor Tianlong to the extreme. They turned into Primogenitor's first form and faced the sword light head-on. Boom! Primogenitor's first form and Luo Kang's 5 colored rays collided with the shocking sword light. There was a continuous boom. Waves of power collided in the center. Then, the 3 waves of power dissolved at the same time. However, Chu Fengmian's body was still pushed back a few steps. Although the crystal on his body did not have any crack, it also proved that the power of Primogenitor's first form and Luo Kang's joint attack were still inferior to Elder Sword Bone's sword light. What a strong power! Even Primogenitor's first form is unable to withstand it. Looks like I have to use my sword Dao. Chu Fengmian's first form could be said to be the strongest move that he could unleash with the Battle Dragon bloodline. However, it was still not a match for Elder Sword Bone. This made Chu Fengmian fear Elder Sword Bone's strength. It seemed that if Chu Fengmian did not have the help of the Blood Dragon, he would definitely be defeated if he fought with Elder Sword Bone. However, Chu Fengmian was not the only one who was shocked. Elder Sword Bone was also stunned when he saw his sword light being blocked by Chu Fengmian. A kid at the Boundary Emperor realm can actually block my sword light? What kind of power is that? An innate divine beast? The power of primogenitor Tianlong. Where did this kid get so many fortuitous encounters? Elder Sword Bone stared at Chu Fengmian with greed in his eyes. This kid still has a lot of wealth on him. After killing him, his fortuitous encounters and wealth will all belong to me. Heaven is helping me. With the Sword Dao Totem and so much wealth, I might even be able to break through to the 9 Tribulations Emperor Gu. Elder Sword Bone's eyes became even more excited. He aimed another sword light at Chu Fengmian. Suddenly, a roar resounded. The Inshua dragon's body suddenly appeared, and its 2 sharp claws slammed down at Old Man Sword Bone's back. The Yin Blood Dragon was not without intelligence. When it saw Elder Sword Bone come back to his senses, it immediately attacked. The 2 sharp claws struck Old Man Sword Bone's back, leaving behind 2 bloody imprints. Old Man Sword Bone vomited a mouthful of blood. Damn it! Chapter 1352. Destroy! Elder Sword Bone suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood essence, staining the sword in his hand. Immediately, an incomparably red blood mark appeared on the spiritual sword. Under the support of the terrifying blood chi, the power of the spiritual sword became countless times more terrifying. The sword blade contained Elder Sword Bone's blood essence and immediately slashed the body of the Yin Blood Dragon. Crack! The scales of the Yin Blood Dragon were cut open on the spot. The sword went deep into the body of the Yin Blood Dragon, crushing its body and turning it into a bloody mist. In order to kill the Yin Blood Dragon, Elder Sword Bone did not hesitate to consume his own blood essence. Although he had unleashed such a powerful sword attack, he had also suffered an indelible injury. His strength had also been reduced to the lowest point. Here's my chance. Chu Fengmian didn't hesitate in the slightest and suddenly attacked at this moment. He had been scheming against Elder Sword Bone for a long time. He did not think that the Yin Blood Dragon could kill Elder Sword Bone. Now that it had suppressed Elder Sword Bone's strength to such an extent, it was already a pleasant surprise. If Elder Sword Bone was at his peak, it would be impossible for Chu Fengmian to defeat him. However, it was not certain now. Sword out! Chu Fengmian's mind moved and the sword essence of the Sword God realm was fully unleashed. At the same time, the 2 spiritual swords, Titanic Divine Sword and Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword, were condensed in Chu Fengmian's hands. He had just comprehended another sword principle totem. His sword principle was different from before. Now, he would let Elder Sword Bone have a taste of Chu Fengmian's sword principle. Boom! When the 2 spiritual swords were in his hands, a sharp sword essence immediately surged out from Chu Fengmian's body and rushed towards Elder Sword Bone. Kid, are you trying to show off your swordsmanship in front of me? Seeing the sword essence surging out from Chu Fengmian's body, Elder Sword Bone's face was filled with ridicule. He was Elder Sword Bone. His name was Sword Bone, which meant that he was unparalleled in sword principle. Even many of the 9 Tribulations Emperor Gu might not be a match for him in terms of sword principle. Now, Chu Fengmian was actually using his swordsmanship in front of him. In his opinion, Chu Fengmian was overestimating himself. Unparalleled Sword Bone. Break, break, break. Old Man Sword Bone said the word break 3 times in a row. He pointed the tip of his sword at Chu Fengmian. Immediately, the space in front of Chu Fengmian began to shatter. The terrifying sword in his hand was about to suppress Chu Fengmian's body in the endless void. Elder Sword Bone had suffered an attack from the Yin Blood Flood Dragon and consumed his blood essence. His strength was less than 50%. However, he was still able to unleash such terrifying might. When faced with Chu Fengmian's attack, he immediately counterattacked. He wasn't prepared to resist at all. Instead, he wanted to take the lead and directly suppress Chu Fengmian. You want to suppress me? What a joke. You only have 50% of your strength now, and you want to suppress me? Unparalleled sword bone? You think you're worthy? I'll let you see what real swordsmanship is. Chu Fengmian laughed as the titanic crescent godly sword in his hand shot up into the sky and fused with Chu Fengmian. The power in Chu Fengmian's body rose steadily under this shocking sword light. At the same time, the bloodline power in Chu Fengmian's body and the power of the soaring serpent transformation were also activated. Under the activation of these two powers, Chu Fengmian's strength soared countless times in an instant. In an instant, Chu Fengmian's strength had reached the same level as Old Man Sword Bone. How can this be? How can you possess such power? Seeing Chu Fengmian's strength soar, Old Man Sword Bone's face revealed some panic. He had never taken Chu Fengmian seriously. Even though he was injured and only had 50% of his strength left, in his opinion, it was more than enough to deal with Chu Fengmian and Luo Kong. His 50% strength wasn't inferior to the ordinary 7 tribulations Emperor Gu. However, he didn't expect Chu Fengmian, who was only in the quasi-emperor realm, to have the same strength as him. Kid, so what if your strength is on the same level as mine? You're just using a secret technique to activate your strength. After all, it doesn't belong to you. Emperor Gu's strength isn't something a kid like you can understand. Old Man Sword Bone stared at Chu Fengmian fiercely. Murderous intent flashed in his eyes, and he suddenly slashed out with his sword. Seize the initiative. Old Man Sword Bone didn't have the intention to kill Chu Fengmian directly. Instead, he wanted to suppress Chu Fengmian and interrogate him about his fortuitous encounter. However, after seeing Chu Fengmian's strength, Old Man Sword Bone decided to kill Chu Fengmian directly. As for Chu Fengmian's strength, in his opinion, he must have obtained the secret technique from the Sword Dao Totem. Once he obtained the Sword Dao Totem, everything would belong to him. Star Sword Art. Starfall. Old Man Sword Bone's sword soared into the sky. Suddenly, the sword chi in the starry sky turned into a few stars and fell towards Chu Fengmian. It's not just strength. In terms of Sword Dao, you're no match for me. Seeing the falling stars, Chu Fengmian's face was incomparably calm. The sword in his hand suddenly moved. The two swords crossed and soared into the sky. Sword breaking the starry sky. Rumble. The sword chi of the two swords soared into the sky and collided with the countless stars, shattering them. Fall, Old Man Sword Bone. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's body closed in on Old Man Sword Bone. The two swords slashed out and ruthlessly slashed at Old Man Sword Bone's chest. No, impossible. How can your Sword Dao be compared to mine? Old Man Sword Bone saw that Chu Fengmian's Sword Dao wasn't at a disadvantage when he clashed with him. It was hard for him to accept. His Sword Dao was famous in the Daluo star field. Even among Emperor Gu, there were very few people who could be on par with his Sword Dao. In his opinion, Chu Fengmian was just a junior, an ant. Now, his Sword Dao wasn't inferior to his, which made him feel like he was going crazy. Be on par? You're overestimating yourself. Hearing Old Man Sword Bone's words, Chu Fengmian revealed a disdainful smile. At the same time, the sword in his hand moved again. 9 domains. Chu Fengmian only muttered these 2 words. A strange change seemed to appear on the spiritual sword in his hand. An unprecedented Sword Dao was suddenly aimed at Old Man Sword Bone and struck out. What Sword Dao is this? Ancient and modern? The fusion of Sword Dao? God, how many Sword Dao are fused together? Impossible. How can there be such a Sword Dao in this world? Chapter 1353. The 9-domain sword technique was simply a combination of tens of thousands of sword technique. It originated from tens of thousands of sword techniques but transcended tens of thousands of sword technique. Even with Old Sword Bone's knowledge, he could not tell how many sword techniques were contained in the 9-domain sword technique. Combining tens of thousands of sword techniques to create a new sword technique was something that many sword masters could not do. Today, it had actually appeared in the hands of a puny quasi-emperor like Chu Fengmian. It was simply beyond Old Sword Bone's imagination. Junior, your sword technique has actually reached this step. The pinnacle of sword technique. I did not expect you to reach the pinnacle of sword technique. Old Sword Bone stared at Chu Fengmian with a burning gaze. The pinnacle of sword technique, self-created sword technique. This was something that many sword cultivators dreamed of. Now, it was right in front of him. Junior, do you really think that you can defeat me? Old Man Sword Bone's expression suddenly turned strange as he revealed a somewhat strange smile. The moment he saw this smile, Luo Kang's face suddenly changed. Senior brother, be careful. Then, a five-colored light appeared in Luo Kang's palm and struck towards Old Sword Bone. Useless brats, you two juniors want to kill this old man? I have traversed the Daluo star field and experienced countless dangers. How can I be killed by you two juniors? Old Sword Bone laughed sinisterly. Pinnacle of sword technique, self-created sword technique. Little brat, I did not expect you to be more terrifying than I imagined. Unfortunately, all of this will be mine. Reversal of heaven and earth. Old Man Sword Bone raised his head and let out a long roar. The injuries on his body suddenly began to reverse. The injuries that had been inflicted by the Blood Flood Dragon earlier were completely healed. Boundless heaven and earth. Sword Bone's sword. Old Sword Bone's aura returned to his peak and his strength was shocking. The moment the sword in his hand was unsheathed, a terrifying sword intent swept through everything. Luo Kang's five-colored light could not even get close to Old Sword Bone before it was completely crushed by his sword intent. At the same time, the sword intent condensed in the sky and vaguely condensed into a giant sword. Die, brat. Old Man Sword Bone raised his hand, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a sinister smile. Then, he aimed his gigantic sword at Chu Fengmian and slashed it down. You merely used a secret technique to forcefully recover a portion of your strength. Do you really think you have the ability to turn the tables? When Chu Fengmian saw the changes in Old Man Sword Bone, he didn't show any signs of nervousness. He was as calm as ever. With a thought, he activated the power of the heaven-devouring beast's heart in his body. Heaven-devouring secret technique. Boom! When the sky-devouring mystic technique was activated, a vortex opened within Old Sword Bone's body. This vortex was continuously devouring Old Man Sword Bone's power. In an instant, Old Man Sword Bone's body was sucked into the vortex. No. What is this? Elder Sword Bone screamed as his body was pulled into the sky-devouring mystic technique. The power in his body was being sucked away by the sky-devouring mystic technique. The huge sword shadow in the sky lost its power and shattered on the spot. Old man, do you really think I don't know that you have a trump card? Chu Fengmian looked at Old Man Sword Bone and said coldly. He had noticed that there was something wrong with Old Man Sword Bone. Old Man Sword Bone's character was incomparably cautious. From the fact that he didn't choose to rush to the immortal burial continent like Chu Fengmian, and instead waited for Chu Fengmian to be safe before entering, one could see how cautious Old Man Sword Bone was. However, such a cautious person would not be in a hurry to kill Chu Fengmian and waste his essence blood to kill the Blood Dragon. Therefore, Chu Fengmian was certain that Old Man Sword Bone had a trump card that he had not used yet. When Chu Fengmian had inserted the sky-devouring mystic technique into Old Man Sword Bone's body, he had also inserted it into Old Man Sword Bone's body. Although Old Man Sword Bone had used the sky-devouring mystic technique, he was still being devoured by the sky-devouring mystic technique. In less than 10 breaths' time, Old Man Sword Bone had lost half of his power in the sky-devouring mystic technique. He was now extremely weak and could no longer escape from the sky-devouring mystic technique. All his struggles were meaningless. Instead, they were being devoured by the sky-devouring mystic technique, which made the sky-devouring mystic technique even stronger. No. Junior, let me go. Let me go. I am willing to impart all my sword Dao to you. Old Man Sword Bone finally panicked. He did not want to die, so he hurriedly begged Chu Fengmian for mercy. However, Chu Fengmian acted as if he did not see Old Man Sword Bone begging for mercy. He continued to activate the sky-devouring mystic technique and continuously extract Old Man Sword Bone's power. Swoosh! Rays of golden light were being extracted from Old Man Sword Bone's body. These rays of golden light were none other than the laws of the world. Under the power of the sky-devouring mystic technique, even the laws of the world were being extracted from Old Man Sword Bone's body. My laws of the world. Junior, I am going to kill you. When I escape, I'll definitely tear you into pieces. Old Man Sword Bone was fuming with anger when he saw that Chu Fengmian was unmoved. He hated Chu Fengmian to the core. If looks could kill, Old Man Sword Bone would have killed Chu Fengmian 1,000,000 times. I hate you. I should have killed you back in Sky Horn City. Even if I was chased by the Sky Horn City Lord, it would have been better than being reduced to this state. I should not have allowed you to comprehend the Sword Dao Totem. Old Man Sword Bone roared with regret. In his opinion, Chu Fengmian's current strength must have been because of the Sword Dao Totem. In Sky Horn City, he originally had the intention to kill Chu Fengmian. However, after considering the Sky Horn City Lord, he did not dare to do so. Now, he was extremely regretful. You still have the energy to talk nonsense? Chu Fengmian sneered when he heard Old Man Sword Bone's endless chatter. Chu Fengmian's mind moved and a surge of spiritual energy was injected into the sky-devouring mystic technique. This caused the devouring speed of the sky-devouring mystic technique to become much faster. In an instant, dozens of laws of the world were extracted from Old Man Sword Bone's body. Your laws of the world belong to me. Coincidentally, they are all Sword Dao laws of the world. They are just right for me. Extract them all for me. Chu Fengmian laughed when he saw the laws of the world being extracted. Old Man Sword Bone's laws of the world were simply perfect for Chu Fengmian. Chapter 1354. Brat, no, young noble, master, as long as you let me go, I will be your slave from now on. I am willing to acknowledge you as my master and serve you. As the laws of heaven and earth were continuously extracted, Old Man Sword Bone could clearly feel that his current strength was no different from an ordinary ancient emperor's. If this continued, his cultivation might fall from Emperor Gu's level. Old Sword Bone had gone through a lot of hardships to reach Emperor Gu's level. The thought of falling from Emperor Gu's level made him abandon his dignity and beg. Acknowledge me as your master? Serve me? It's too late. Chu Fengmian glanced at Old Sword Bone and sneered. Chu Fengmian was unmoved by Old Sword Bone's pleading. Old Sword Bone hated Chu Fengmian to the bone. Even if Chu Fengmian forcefully subdued him, there was a chance that he would betray him. It was better to extract all of Old Sword Bone's strength and turn it into Chu Fengmian's. You'd better contribute all of your worldly laws and wealth to me. It's your honor to be able to become a part of my power. Chu Fengmian said and increased the devouring speed of the sky-devouring secret technique. Strands of worldly laws were extracted from Old Sword Bone's body. Suddenly, Old Sword Bone's spirit energy was depleted, and he felt extremely weak. His cultivation dropped from 7 Tribulation Emperor Gu to 6 Tribulation True Emperor. No! Old Sword Bone roared loudly. However, this was only the beginning. 6 Tribulation True Emperor, 5 Tribulation True Emperor, 4 Tribulation True Emperor. Old Sword Bone's cultivation continued to drop until he was a 1st Tribulation True Emperor. The sky-devouring secret technique slowly ended. Old Sword Bone's strength had been extracted. The moment he fell from the sky-devouring secret technique, he died on the spot. Old Sword Bone was mentally and physically exhausted. He no longer had the strength to struggle and died on the spot. Emperor Gu had fallen just like that. Chu Fengmian did not sympathize with him. Since this old man Sword Bone wanted to deal with Chu Fengmian, he could not be blamed on Chu Fengmian that he ended up dying. Senior brother, you really killed Old Sword Bone? Luo Kong asked in disbelief when he saw Old Sword Bone's corpse. This was Old Sword Bone, a super expert who had been famous for a long time. However, he died in Chu Fengmian's hands. One had to know that Luo Kong was only at the quasi-emperor realm. If news of him killing the ancient emperor as a quasi-emperor got out, others would think that Luo Kong had gone mad and was dreaming. Seeing Luo Kang's reaction, Chu Fengmian only smiled and didn't answer. Although Chu Fengmian had killed Old Man Sword Bone, he had borrowed the power of other things, such as the power of the Yin Blood Flood Dragon. However, all of this was part of Chu Fengmian's plan. It could be said that Chu Fengmian had killed an ancient emperor himself. Old Sword Bone Bone. Old Sword Emperor was Sword Emperor Emperor Old Sword Bones on the Old Sword Old on Sword Old Master. Elder Sword Bone was a veteran quasi-emperor who had been famous for a long time. He had dominated the Daluo star domain for thousands of years, so the wealth in his hands was definitely not a small amount. Now that it had fallen into Chu Fengmian's hands, he could be considered to have made a small fortune. Chu Fengmian poured his spiritual energy into the Old Sword Bone's empty ring. Chu Fengmian saw countless spiritual weapons. Almost all of them were heavenly spiritual weapons. There were more than 20 of them in total. Why are there so many spiritual weapons in Old Sword Bone's empty ring? Chu Fengmian looked at the items in the empty ring with doubt. These spiritual weapons were obviously not suitable for Old Sword Bone. For a sword cultivator, the only spiritual weapon they needed was the sword in their hand. The other spiritual weapons would only be a hindrance. It was just like how Chu Fengmian only used the ancestral Dragon Paragon sword and the Titanic Divine sword. This is Fire Cloud Emperor Gu's Fire Cloud fan? Luo Kong, who was beside Chu Fengmian, also saw Chu Fengmian opening Old Sword Bone's empty ring. He was surprised to see a fan-like spiritual weapon. How did Fire Cloud Emperor Gu's spiritual weapon end up in Old Sword Bone's hands? However, it is said that Fire Cloud Emperor Gu has not appeared for dozens of years. Could it be that Fire Cloud Emperor Gu was killed by Old Sword Bone? Fire Cloud Emperor Gu was also a solitary Emperor Gu. However, he had not appeared for dozens of years. It was said that Fire Cloud Emperor Gu was in seclusion. However, Luo Kong could see that there was something wrong with this Fire Cloud fan. Such a famous spiritual weapon would never be sold. It was most likely that Fire Cloud Emperor Gu had died in the hands of Old Sword Bone. Also, this is Wind Travel Emperor Gu's Wind Travel Spirit Spear. This is Thunder Shattering Emperor Gu's Thunder Shattering Hammer. Luo Kong recognized many of the spiritual treasures in the Old Man Sword Bone's spatial ring. Unsurprisingly, they were all spiritual treasures that ancient emperors had made a name for themselves long ago. Looks like Old Sword Bone has killed many Emperor Gu. He has actually accumulated many spiritual weapons. With so many heaven-grade spiritual weapons, he can sell them for a lot of wealth. Luo Kong looked at the spiritual weapons in the empty ring and said with envy, "Some of these spiritual weapons are quite suitable for junior brother. Why don't I give them to you?" Chu Fengmian glanced at the empty ring and suddenly pointed his finger. The 3 spiritual weapons, including the Fire Cloud fan, immediately flew towards Luo Kong. Luo Kong cultivated the 5 elements cultivation technique. These 5 elements spiritual weapons were the most suitable for him. "Thank you, senior brother." Luo Kong was stunned for a moment before he accepted it. Since Chu Fengmian had made a fortune, he did not need to be courteous with him. In Old Sword Bone's empty ring, other than the spiritual weapons, there were also a lot of elixirs and sacred medicines. This empty ring was comparable to the treasury of a small sect. Although Old Sword Bone did not belong to any sect, with his strength, he must have killed many Emperor Gu and plundered a lot of wealth. Among them, Chu Fengmian also found an ancient divine pill, the Flying Immortal Pill. It was used by Emperor Gu to make a breakthrough. It was enough to increase the chances of a 7 tribulations Emperor Gu's breakthrough by 30%. It seemed like old Sword Bone had prepared it for him to make a breakthrough. Now it had fallen into Chu Fengmian's hands. The Flying Immortal Pill is not bad. It will be useful when I make a breakthrough to the Emperor realm. Chu Fengmian glanced at the Flying Immortal Pills, then put them into his empty ring. At the same time, Chu Fengmian also put a large amount of wealth from Old Man Sword Bone's empty ring into his own empty ring. Chapter 1355. Is this a sword box? In the deepest part of the empty ring, there was a spirit weapon that seemed to have been hidden there on purpose. Chu Fengmian took a closer look and saw that the rectangular spiritual weapon was actually a sword box. When Chu Fengmian held the sword box in his hand, a shocking sword ray shot up to the sky. This sword ray alone was not inferior to Chu Fengmian's 2 spiritual swords. Chu Fengmian's 2 spiritual swords had been baptized by the power of heaven and earth. Now they had surpassed heaven-grade spiritual weapons and reached the level of semi-extreme immortal weapons. How could Chu Fengmian not be surprised that this sword box had the same sword intent as his 2 spiritual swords? Chu Fengmian picked up the sword box. As soon as it fell into his hand, a surge of sword qi rushed towards Chu Fengmian's body. If he could not withstand this surge of sword qi, his body would be broken and he would die on the spot. Of course, this surge of sword qi was not worth mentioning for Chu Fengmian. He condensed his sword intent and enveloped it. The surge of sword qi was crushed on the spot. At the same time, the sword box became stable. This was the sword box's test. It was just like how many outstanding heaven-grade spirit artifacts had their own consciousness, so if one wanted to be recognized as their master, one had to pass their test. Take the Titanic Divine Sword for example. When Jian Zhanxian used it, he could not even exert 30% of its power. This was because the Titanic Divine Sword did not recognize Jian Zhanxian as its master. This sword box was also the same. Moreover, this sword box was much more ferocious. If one could not gain the sword box's recognition, the sword box would not hesitate to destroy the person who wanted to recognize it as its master. However, it was extremely easy for Chu Fengmian to subdue the sword box. With his sword intent, Chu Fengmian had already comprehended the incomplete sword technique hidden in the sword totem, let alone subduing a small sword box. This was the first sword box that Chu Fengmian had obtained. For sword cultivators, sword boxes were not as important as spiritual weapons. Moreover, sword boxes were extremely rare. In particular, sword boxes that reached the level of heaven-grade spiritual weapons were even rarer. This time, Chu Fengmian encountered one. Let's see how powerful this sword case is. Chu Fengmian muttered to himself as he picked up the sword box and placed it on his back. He injected spiritual energy into it, and suddenly, countless flying swords flew out from the sword box. These flying swords were formed from spiritual energy, but the sword essence contained within them was not much different from a real spiritual sword. Chu Fengmian felt that these flying swords had almost reached the level of a heaven-grade spirit artifact. Once this sword box was taken out, it was enough to release dozens of flying swords. So what if that's all? Chu Fengmian wasn't satisfied with the outcome. The sword box was an existence that surpassed the heaven-grade spiritual artifact, just like the ancestral dragon's supreme sword. Although these dozens of flying swords were useful, they were far from Chu Fengmian's expectations. No, this is only the most basic usage of the sword casket. Can the power of the sword casket be fused? Chu Fengmian carefully observed the sword box. Suddenly, his palm moved, and the dozens of flying swords fell into Chu Fengmian's palm, turning into a spiritual sword. This spiritual sword gathered the power of all the flying swords. Although it wasn't comparable to the ancestral dragon's supreme sword, it was much stronger than most of the heaven-grade spiritual swords. especially when Chu Fengmian noticed that this spiritual sword looked like the spiritual sword condensed by Old Man Sword Bone. No wonder Old Man Sword Bone didn't have a spiritual sword, but condensed it with spiritual energy. It must be because of this sword box. Chu Fengmian tested the spiritual sword in his hand a few times, but still shook his head. Although the spiritual swords condensed from the sword box were powerful, they were still inferior to the Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword and the Titanic Gate Divine Sword. If Chu Fengmian lacked spiritual swords, this sword box would be useful. However, Chu Fengmian didn't lack spiritual swords, so this sword box seemed a little useless. Chu Fengmian picked up the sword box and observed that there were 2 holes on the sword box. The size of the holes were similar to the spiritual swords. I wonder if I can put the spiritual swords inside? Chu Fengmian moved his palm and condensed the Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword and the Titanic Gate Divine Sword before putting them into the sword box. The moment the 2 spiritual swords were put into the sword box suddenly seemed to be awakened. The 2 spiritual swords burst out with shocking sword intent along with the sword box. The 3 sword intents intertwined at the same time and gradually fused into one, complementing each other. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with surprise. He observed carefully and the corner of his mouth curled into a smile. I see. This is the original purpose of this sword box. Nurturing swords. Chu Fengmian had almost forgotten the original purpose of the sword box. Nurturing swords was the original purpose of the sword box. As for condensing flying swords, it was only a small part of the sword box's power. Its true power was still nurturing swords. When the Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword and the Titanic Gate Divine Sword were put into the sword box, Chu Fengmian could clearly feel that the power of the 2 spiritual swords had increased by a lot. It was at least 30% stronger. Unsheath. Whoosh. Chu Fengmian pointed his finger. The Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword was unsheathed and released a ray of sword qi. Its power has indeed increased by a lot, Chu Fengmian said with satisfaction when he saw the ray of sword qi. As long as the 2 spiritual swords were put into the sword box, they would be nourished by the power of the sword box. The 3 unsheathed swords would all contain the power of the sword box. At the same time, Chu Fengmian also noticed that the grade of the Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword seemed to be continuously nourished by the sword box. Its original power was even increasing. Although it was very slow, it couldn't escape Chu Fengmian's eyes. If a spiritual sword was put into the sword box, it would probably become stronger and stronger. This sword box was enough to nurture an incomparably outstanding spiritual sword. Just right, I'll use this sword box to nourish the 2 swords. Chu Fengmian had always wanted to nurture the Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword and the Titanic Gate Divine Sword into apex immortal weapons. Although he had the Emperor Jar, its power wasn't suitable for him. Chu Fengmian kept the Emperor Jar as his trump card. If there was a spiritual weapon that was most suitable for Chu Fengmian, it would be these 2 spiritual swords. The Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword had been with Chu Fengmian since he was still weak. The Titanic Gate Divine Sword was also the spiritual sword of the former master of Sword Dao. It represented Chu Fengmian's lineage of Sword Dao. Chu Fengmian didn't want to abandon these 2 spiritual swords. Now that they were constantly nourished in the sword case, even if these 2 swords couldn't reach the apex of immortal weapons, their power would increase a lot. For Chu Fengmian, there were only advantages and no disadvantages. Chapter 1356. Chu Fengmian carried the sword case on his back and wanted to give it a name. But when he was about to name it, the words Horizon appeared in his mind. Apparently, it was the sword case that told Chu Fengmian about it. Horizon. Since you like it, let's continue to call it Horizon. Chu Fengmian felt the fluctuation of the sword case and smiled. Anyway, he didn't care about a name. Just like the Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword, Chu Fengmian didn't name it. Luokong, do you know a name called Horizon? Chu Fengmian suddenly looked at Luo Kong and pointed at the sword case on his back. It's related to the sword case. Horizon? Luo Kong was a little confused when he heard the name. This name wasn't rare, but he couldn't think of a name that was related to the sword case on Chu Fengmian's back. If it was related to the sword case, it had to be a sword cultivator expert. Suddenly, Luo Kang's eyes lit up. Horizon, Horizon. Senior brother, are you talking about Sword Immortal Horizon? Sword Immortal Horizon? Who is he? Chu Fengmian was a little confused. He grew up in the 9 regions and didn't leave the 9 regions in his previous life. Chu Fengmian knew a little about the experts of the 9 regions. But Chu Fengmian didn't know about the experts of the extraterritorial starry sky. Moreover, Sword Immortal Horizon was probably a person who had died long ago. Sword Immortal Horizon was a famous expert for tens of thousands of years. No, he should be the first person of that era. He became an immortal with the sword and stepped into the celestial realm before he was 100 years old. Rumor has it that Sword Immortal Horizon's realm surpassed the celestial realm. Luo Kong looked at the sword case on Chu Fengmian's back in amazement. The sword case on Senior Brother's back belongs to Sword Immortal Horizon? Even after tens of thousands of years, many young people in this era had heard of the Sword Immortal of the Horizon. He was a legendary expert. It was said that Sword Immortal Horizon wasn't a disciple of any force. When he was young, he was unknown. But when he first appeared, he was ranked first on the genius ranking. Later on, he stepped into the celestial realm before he was 100 years old and became the youngest celestial realm. Because his swordsmanship was unparalleled in the world, and he had even stepped into the celestial realm, he was known as the Sword Immortal. However, Sword Immortal Horizon also fell very quickly. Several hundred years after his appearance, he was besieged and killed. Although Sword Immortal Horizon killed all of his enemies, he was still seriously injured. Then, he disappeared and never appeared again. According to the records of the various sects, it was said that the Sword Immortal of the Horizon had already fallen. As for his inheritance, no one had obtained it yet. Could it be that Old Man Sword Bone has obtained the inheritance of the Horizon Sword Immortal? Suddenly, Luo Kong said as if he had thought of something. Old Man Sword Bone is indeed someone who appeared out of nowhere. Could he have obtained the inheritance of the World's Edge sword case? Oh? Elder Sword Bone's swordsmanship is indeed extraordinary. Hearing Luo Kang's words, Chu Fengmian's mind moved. He suddenly extended his hand and made a grabbing motion. A golden light fell into Chu Fengmian's palm. This golden light was Old Man Sword Bone's memory. As Chu Fengmian's spiritual consciousness entered the memory, Chu Fengmian also obtained Old Man Sword Bone's memory. From this memory, Chu Fengmian understood that Old Man Sword Bone was originally an ordinary warrior without any outstanding qualities. However, later on, he went to the immortal burial continent to try his luck and found a cave. In this cave, he obtained the World's Edge sword case and a few swordsmanship. From then on, he soared to the sky. In Old Man Sword Bone's memory, he actually did not obtain the opportunity in the cave. In fact, he only obtained a small part of it. The real inheritance of the opportunity was inside the cave. However, with Old Man Sword Bone's strength, he was unable to obtain it. He was so anxious to obtain the Sword Principle Totem because he wanted to use the power of the Sword Principle Totem to step into the realm of 8 calamities Emperor Gu before obtaining the real opportunity in the cave. The World's Edge Sword Immortal was the king of an era. If one could obtain his opportunity, it would be earth-shattering. This was the true inheritance of the heavenly man, that cave should be the cave of the World's Edge Sword Immortal. It happens to be in the immortal burial continent. If I can obtain it, it will be extremely beneficial for me. The World's Edge Sword Immortal was the second person Chu Fengmian had seen who had reached the heavenly man realm through the sword principle. No matter who obtained his cave, it would be a great opportunity. Moreover, Chu Fengmian was a sword cultivator. If Chu Fengmian obtained the world's edge sword immortal swordsmanship and integrated it into the 9 regions sword principle, it would be enough to elevate Chu Fengmian's 9 regions sword principle. It's not easy to obtain the cave of the world's edge sword immortal. Even old man Sword Bone could not obtain it. With my current strength, I can't do it either. Chu Fengmian memorized the records of the world's edge sword immortal's cave in old man Sword Bone's memory. Then, he opened his eyes. Although the cave was important, Chu Fengmian was not in a hurry to obtain it. Old man Sword Bone did not have the ability to obtain it, and Chu Fengmian also could not do it now. The most important thing now was to increase Chu Fengmian's strength. Now that Chu Fengmian had just stepped into the Boundary Emperor realm, he could still increase his strength by a lot. Xian Wang grass. Chu Fengmian's figure flashed, and came to the place where the Yin blood dragon flew out. In the underground crack, he suddenly saw a yellow spiritual herb. Found it. Chu Fengmian reached out his hand, and the Xian Wang grass fell into his palm. The Yin blood dragon had just been killed by old man Sword Bone, which gave Chu Fengmian an advantage. He did not have to deal with the Yin blood dragon himself. This Xian Wang grass was indeed the same as the purple veins. It had completely matured. The materials for the purple veins profound pill, other than the Xian Wang grass and the purple veins, were all ordinary spiritual herbs. Chu Fengmian had already prepared them. I planned to refine a cauldron of elixirs. Chu Fengmian looked at Luo Kong and said, "During this period, it's best not to let anyone disturb me." Using ancient sacred herbs to refine an ancient sacred elixir was no small matter. It was the first time Chu Fengmian tried it. Originally, Chu Fengmian should have gone to find a safe place. However, Chu Fengmian was pressed for time. He did not have time to waste. The immortal burial continent would only open for a month. Now, he had wasted nearly a week's time. He was looking for a place to refine the elixir. He was afraid that by the time Chu Fengmian finished refining the elixir, the immortal burial continent would have closed. The immortal burial continent would open at different times. Sometimes it would not open for hundreds of years. Chu Fengmian did not want to waste hundreds of years waiting. He could only take the risk and refine the elixir. Chapter 1357. Don't worry, senior brother. With me here, no one will disturb you. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, Luo Kong hurriedly said. He was now sincerely convinced by Chu Fengmian, especially because Chu Fengmian was extremely generous to him. Although they hadn't known each other for a long time, he had already thoroughly regarded Chu Fengmian as a senior brother. All right. Chu Fengmian nodded at Luo Kang's words. With Luo Kang's strength, it shouldn't be a problem for him to face the demon immortals below Emperor Gu. In the immortal burial continent, Emperor Gu wasn't that common. I'll leave the king of the inner demon to you for the time being. You can order him to take action if he encounters an expert he can't handle. Chu Fengmian thought for a moment and summoned the king of the inner demon just in case. The king of the inner demon might not be as strong as Emperor Gu, but his sudden attack was enough to make Emperor Gu wary. With Luo Kong, it wouldn't be a problem to force Emperor Gu to retreat. Chu Fengmian instructed the king of the inner demon and stepped into the depths of the valley. He sat on the ground and condensed a ball of pure yang skyfire in front of him. Chu Fengmian's divine body of ice and fire was much stronger than before after being tempered by the jade cloud fruit. His control over the pure yang skyfire had also become more proficient. The pure yang skyfire began to condense under Chu Fengmian's control and turned into the shape of a cauldron. At the same time, dozens of spiritual herbs flew out in front of Chu Fengmian. These spiritual herbs were part of Chu Fengmian's collection. Chu Fengmian didn't sell the spiritual herbs he obtained from killing the other demon immortals. They were all kept in the empty ring. After all, many sacred herbs couldn't be bought with money. Chu Fengmian didn't lack money, so he collected them. Now they came in handy. Fire up! Chu Fengmian slapped the cauldron with one hand. Immediately, a ball of flame ignited inside the cauldron. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's other hand grabbed a few sacred herbs and threw them into the cauldron. The pure yang heavenly fire was one of the most domineering flames in the world. Originally, a sacred medicine would need at least 1 or 2 days to be refined in the flame before it could be completely refined. However, in the pure yang heavenly flame, it was transformed into an incomparably pure medicinal liquid in an instant. Of course, the way Chu Fengmian was refining medicine was also extremely risky. The higher the temperature of the flame, the lower the tolerance for mistakes. For some alchemy grandmasters, it wasn't that they couldn't obtain a flame like the pure yang heavenly fire, but even if they obtained it, they wouldn't dare to use it easily. After all, with such a high-temperature flame, the slightest mistake in controlling it would cause the pill to explode. However, Chu Fengmian wasn't afraid. He now had the ice and fire divine body. This pure yang heavenly flame was like a part of Chu Fengmian's divine body. In less than 10 minutes, Chu Feng had refined a dozen or so sacred herbs into a pure medicinal liquid in the furnace. In front of Chu Fengmian were only the violet veins and black-yellow grass. At this time, it was time to refine pills. Go! Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with seriousness. He grabbed the purple veins and black-yellow grass and threw them into the furnace at the same time. These 2 sacred medicines were different from other sacred medicines. If other sacred medicines were destroyed, he could just add another one. However, if Chu Fengmian missed out on these 2 sacred medicines, it would be almost impossible for him to collect another set of them. In the furnace, the 2 sacred medicines gradually melted under the pure yang heavenly flame and turned into a pure medicinal liquid. The black-yellow grass and the purple veins had different medicinal effects. However, these 2 sacred medicines complemented each other. The degree of refinement of these 2 medicinal liquids must be the same. If there was a slight difference, it would be impossible to refine the purple veins profound pill. In ancient times, the purple veins and black-yellow grass weren't so rare. However, the purple veins profound pill was still incomparably precious. This was because of the difficulty of refining the purple veins profound pill. Chu Fengmian carefully controlled each flame to refine the 2 medicinal liquids at the same time. 1 hour later, there were beads of sweat on Chu Fengmian's forehead. Even an Emperor Realm Master wouldn't be able to bear such concentration in alchemy. Finally, the 2 medicinal liquids gradually shrank in the pure yang heavenly flame. The impurities in them were completely refined. Come here. With a wave of Chu Fengmian's hand, the medicinal liquids refined from the other 10 or so spiritual herbs immediately flew over and merged with the 2 clumps of medicinal liquid. A blurry pill shape had already appeared within the pill furnace. At the same time, an incomparably fragrant medicinal essence drifted out. The purple veins profound pill had reached the final step. Done! Chu Fengmian pointed his finger. The vague pill shape was instantly condensed. Under Chu Fengmian's power, it was compressed bit by bit. Finally, it turned into a longan-sized purple pill in the furnace. The purple veins profound pill is finally refined. Although it took less than 2 hours, Chu Fengmian looked exhausted. The pressure of refining this kind of ancient sacred medicine was really too great. But when he saw the purple veins profound pill, Chu Fengmian knew that it was all worth it. Chu Fengmian picked up the purple veins profound pill and put it into his mouth, without any hesitation. At the same time, he activated the sky-devouring secret technique. Chu Fengmian's entire body turned into an incomparably huge vortex. The purple veins profound pill was completely shattered in the vortex. It turned into masses of incomparably pure spiritual energy and integrated into Chu Fengmian's body. In Chu Fengmian's body, 129,600 blood and flesh crystals were devouring the power of the purple veins profound pill. With the continuous devouring, these blood and flesh crystals became more and more sparkling and translucent. This made Chu Fengmian overjoyed. He remembered that the bronze heavenly demon skeleton had 129,600 jade-like crystals. Chu Fengmian's physical body was now transforming in this direction, but it was still far from the real great completion. When the power of the purple vein's profound pill was continuously devoured, Chu Fengmian observed that the crimson color of the crystals had faded significantly. Although it was still incomparable to the jade-like color of the bronze heavenly demon skeleton, it was still a big step closer to attaining an immortal true body than it had been before. Chapter 1358. Previously, Chu Fengmian had comprehended the second form of the 9 forms of progenitor in front of the primogenitor statue in the sacred dragon secret realm. However, every time Chu Fengmian used the second form of the 9 forms of progenitor, his body would be torn apart. Obviously, Chu Fengmian's physical body was unable to withstand the power of the second form. It was fine for cultivation. However, once it was used against an enemy, it would definitely kill 1,000 enemies while harming 800 of his own. Therefore, Chu Fengmian did not dare to use it casually. However, Chu Fengmian's cultivation had already stepped into the quasi-emperor realm. His strength was no longer the same as before. Moreover, his physical body had been tempered by the purple vein's profound core. He should be able to use the second form of the 9 forms of progenitor. The power of the second form was several times stronger than the first form. It would also become one of Chu Fengmian's trump cards. Moreover, Chu Fengmian's harvest this time was far more than that. Suddenly, a large ball of dazzling golden light appeared in Chu Fengmian's palm. The laws of heaven and earth. These golden lights were the laws of heaven and earth that Chu Fengmian had extracted from the hands of Old Man Sword Bone. Old Man Sword Bone was a 7-tribulation true emperor. There were a total of 1,300 laws of heaven and earth in his body. These 1,300 laws of heaven and earth all belonged to the Sword Tao. They were the most suitable laws of heaven and earth for Chu Fengmian. Now that Chu Fengmian's cultivation had broken through to the quasi-emperor realm, he could accommodate more laws of heaven and earth than before. Devour. These laws of heaven and earth had become ownerless after Old Man Sword Bone's death. Chu Fengmian activated the sky-devouring secret technique, and the laws of heaven and earth immediately merged into Chu Fengmian's body. The laws of heaven and earth entered Chu Fengmian's body and merged into his divine veins. His strength rose steadily. Now that he had broken through to the quasi-emperor realm, his body was like a bottomless pit that continuously devoured the laws of heaven and earth. In an instant, more than 100 laws of heaven and earth were devoured by Chu Fengmian. An ordinary quasi-emperor's body could only withstand 100 laws of heaven and earth, and that was the limit. However, when Chu Fengmian was in the immortal realm, his body could withstand 300 laws of heaven and earth. Now that he had stepped into the quasi-emperor realm, his body had become unbelievably strong. Chu Fengmian's body now contained 500 strands of the laws of the universe, but this was still not the limit. After a full 2 hours, Chu Fengmian's speed of devouring the nomological laws of heaven and earth began to slow down. The nomological laws of heaven and earth finally reached their limit when they reached 900. Chu Fengmian's divine veins no longer had an empty ring that could devour another law of heaven and earth. Chu Fengmian slowly stood up. He could feel his current strength. If he were to activate the laws of heaven and earth, he would be able to fight Elder Sword Bone alone without the help of the Een Blood Flood Dragon. If the previous Chu Fengmian could only fight against Emperor Gu, the current Chu Fengmian was no different from the real Emperor Gu in terms of strength. Even among the 7 calamities Emperor Gu, he wasn't considered weak. 900 is indeed the limit. If I want to reach the threshold of Emperor Gu, I must step into the Emperor realm, Chu Fengmian slowly said as he felt the laws of heaven and earth in his body. 1,000 laws of heaven and earth was a watershed. Once 1,000 laws of heaven and earth were condensed, It represented the power of Emperor Gu. Even a monstrous genius couldn't condense 1,000 laws of heaven and earth when he was in the quasi-emperor realm. 900 laws of heaven and earth was the limit. If one wanted to truly possess the power of Emperor Gu, he must step into the emperor realm. Chu Fengmian's current limit was 900 laws of heaven and earth. Unless his strength improved further, he wouldn't be able to accommodate more laws of heaven and earth. In terms of true strength, Chu Fengmian was still inferior to Emperor Gu. However, his fortuitous encounters were more amazing than most Emperor Gu. Therefore, even the 7 calamities Emperor Gu couldn't gain any advantage over Chu Fengmian. As for the remaining laws of heaven and earth, Chu Fengmian moved his palm and suppressed them in the empty ring. He could continue to devour them when his strength improved further. With such strength, I should be qualified to fight for some opportunities in the immortal burial continent. I can even go to the cave mansion of Sword Immortal Sky Horizon to take a look. Chu Fengmian's figure flashed and walked out of the valley. With a swoosh, he came to Luo Kang's side. "Who is it?" Luo Kang was shocked when he saw the figure that suddenly flashed over. He hurriedly circulated his spiritual energy, but when he saw that it was Chu Fengmian, his face relaxed. "It's Senior Brother. Senior Brother, have you finished refining pills?" "Yes." Chu Fengmian nodded and observed the surroundings. There was a smell of blood. "What's going on? Did someone come here?" "I encountered some disciples of the Solar Flame Palace. When they saw me guarding this place, they thought that there was some treasure in the valley and wanted to rush in. They were all killed by me," Luo Kang slowly said. "Since Senior Brother has come out of seclusion, let's leave now. I heard that 2 elders from the Solar Flame Palace came this time. They are both Emperor Gu. That young Master Rian has some grudges with Senior Brother. It's not good to stay here for long." "Oh? People from the Solar Flame Palace?" "It seems that the Solar Flame Palace came here with Old Man Sword Bone." Chu Fengmian's eyes flickered. He already knew that with young Master Rian's character, he would not let Chu Fengmian go so easily. Now, it seemed that the Solar Flame Palace wanted Chu Fengmian and Luo Kang to fight with Old Man Sword Bone. It would be best if they could exhaust a portion of Old Man Sword Bone's strength and let them reap the benefits. The 2 Emperor Gu probably did not come to deal with Chu Fengmian and Luo Kang, but to deal with Old Man Sword Bone. Unfortunately, it was impossible for them to predict that Old Man Sword Bone would die in Chu Fengmian's hands and spoil their plan. "How strong are the 2 elders of the Solar Flame Palace?" Chu Fengmian looked at Luo Kang and suddenly asked. "Aside from the Solar Flame Palace Master, who is an 8 Calamity Emperor Gu, the other elders of the Solar Flame Palace are all 7 Calamity Emperor Gu." Luo Kang's eyes suddenly changed when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. He seemed to have guessed something and said in surprise, "Senior Brother, are you planning to deal with the people of the Solar Flame Palace?" "That's right. If we don't get rid of young Master Rian, he will still be a scourge. Since we have come to the immortal burial continent, even if young Master Rian dies here, the people of the Solar Flame Palace will not know that we killed him." Chu Fengmian nodded as killing intent flashed in his eyes. "You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.